Welcome everybody to El Callito podcast. I generally don't do this content in English, but I thought it would be interesting to do a video about what's going on in Puerto Rico right now. Usually, what I do is content about the history of Puerto Rico. But and you guys, if you guys like this content in English, let me know in the comments, and maybe we'll do more of this in the future. So today, our guest today is Debbie Perez from Boriken Podcast. She has a social media page. I already blanked on a word there, and
No, it's okay. No, I
and
was
you cover a lot of different things, but you also cover a lot of what's going on right now in Puerto Rico, and a lot of your content is in English. And like I was telling you before we started recording, I don't see that there's
I,
that's my dog.
and the
That's my
dogs
dog.
come in. Hey, don't forget about
So
us. This is great.
so I don't see a lot of content from people in Puerto Rico about what's going on in Puerto Rico that's made in English, and so there's very few pages that I know of at least that do that, and yours is one of them. And so I wanted to have you on to just to talk about a little bit about what's going on in Puerto Rico right now. And I wanted to start off by if you could explain a little bit. My dog is really distracting me.
Don't worry, it's okay.
um, so I just wanted to start by asking you to tell everybody a little bit about what Boriken Podcast is.
Yeah. So, hi everybody, and thank you, Andres, for having me on your podcast. Is really exciting because I had you on my podcast. So this is great. Yeah. So I am a filmmaker, a writer, a poet. I have a background in public health, and so the podcast is really to talk about social issues from sort of that health perspective and mental health. And when I first started it, it was actually when I lived in Boston and New York, and so like I really focused at the time more on the diaspora and how the diaspora can help from out there. And then once I started living in Puerto Rico, I started to think, especially in the past year, I really started to think about like, what can I do to further the conversation, but from within Puerto Rico? Because I feel like there's so much nuance that gets lost. And especially because like, if you see any sort of any conversation around Puerto Rico on the mainland side or in like US media, it's always just, it misses the point, or they treat us very much like we are these like, from the outside, and I think we've mentioned this where like sometimes they kind of look at us from an anthropological, is that the right word,
Yeah.
standpoint, instead of like trying to get our perspective. And so it's really about, for me, the podcast is really about connecting people in the diaspora with what's happening here, and to understand that the diaspora isn't people that were born and raised over there. It's people that are constantly leaving Puerto Rico. Even within like the past 5 years, we're seeing a crazy level of migration outside of the island for a lot of reasons. And so understanding what those reasons are, getting people informed on what's going on. I mean, you could see it on my page. It's been, to me, it's been hopeful. You should see how many people are really wanting to understand what those issues are and really trying to engage with it, because we just have a lack of it, and so I'm really grateful to the other people who are also doing content in English, because I think for a long time my perspective has been that we use our English as a weapon. Like, for me, English was forced on me in the sense of like, I was taken, outside of Puerto Rico to go live out there and then forced to learn a language. And so I think I want to now use this as a means to now talk about these issues and stop, in a lot of ways, stop these like perspectives or narratives or biases against us. So sorry, I'll stop there. Gone on for a minute, but yeah, that's essentially what my podcast is about.
No, that's great. That's great. And I think you bring up a great point about the diaspora, in the sense that something about this isn't unique to Puerto Rico. A lot of the stuff that we're gonna say probably is not unique to Puerto Rico, but we're talking specifically about Puerto Rico now. But with the diaspora, like I was reading, because I didn't know the numbers, right, of the migrations, but like between
Yeah.
the 40s and the 60s, in a span of like 30 years, about 1.25 million Puerto Ricans moved from Puerto Rico to the US,
Yeah.
right? And this was like state sponsored. Like there were like this it's almost like
It's like,
job, una agencia de empleo, like I can't like
oh,
like a
the
job
job. Yeah, yeah,
agency.
yeah. No.
Yeah,
The they had yeah, they had like flyers, they had
yeah,
government agencies that encouraged it in a
yeah,
way that was like very also very misleading, because once you get over there, it wasn't like this land of opportunity, especially for Latinos, especially for immigrants. So
yeah. They
it's
ended up
very
going to
interesting.
work in farms, like in a very very bad labor conditions, and
Yeah.
many of them, not everyone, there were different experiences, but that was a big part of what was happening. And it basically just like broke up the Puerto Rican family, to say it one way. Just I'm
Yeah.
trying to be broad about it, but like,
Yeah, that's
so
definitely one
now
way
we
to
have,
put it.
and there's been other mass migrations recently, in the past, what, 5, 10 years. I don't know the numbers recently, but also like hundreds of thousands of Puerto Ricans have also, like, I know at some point the population in Puerto Rico was 4 million. Now it's
Yeah.
3 million. So like,
Yeah.
so it happened recently, and there's 6 million Puerto Ricans in the States, 3 million in Puerto Rico. And I don't know how many of those 6 million in the US know Spanish, but just the language barrier alone is a big, can be a challenge when it comes to
Exactly.
communicating things, because, like, for example, I do most of my content in Spanish,
Mhm.
and part of the reason is because that information is also necessary in Puerto Rico, right? It's also,
Exactly.
there's a lot of misinformation in Puerto Rico as well,
So
and when it comes
much.
to a lot of other things, a lot of stuff that people just don't know. And
Mhm.
so when it comes time to make this content, you kind of have to make a choice in terms of like, who am I going to make it in Spanish, or am I going to make it in English? Who am I going to reach with this? Because either you vote for you vote no you make it for the people in Puerto Rico, where the majority of the population does not speak English, or
Mhm.
you make it for the people in the States. And then, right there, then you leave, just a big chunk of the Puerto Rico out of the conversation. And
Yeah.
so, it's kind of like a big dilemma that we're faced with because of these migrations.
Yeah, but I would say I'm really happy that you do your content in Spanish, because I love listening to podcasts in Spanish, so that I could, again, I have this fractured, language where I can't switch immediately to Spanish sometimes, and then when I speak Spanish, I go and I say Spanglish, and it just goes back and forth. But I appreciate that you do content in Spanish for people here. I think you are here, it's important that you do that, but I'm grateful that you make space for this kind of content as well, so like for us to be able to speak. I would say that, I think the question about language too is also to make more spaces. We need more spaces, and I think also seeing more women, like I particularly think, like for me, it's also like being able to represent a more female perspective, talking about the femicides. I did an interview with Stephanie. I have interviews on my page about, the femicides. I want to talk about female perspectives as well. And so I think we can all make space for this. Like I feel like it is a dilemma, but it doesn't have to be if we just all kind of put in this effort of being able to share and communicate. And so that's why I think this is really important, that we're having space, and that we're also having these questions is really important, right? Because when you mentioned the first migration in the 40s and 50s, I was like, yeah, that was like the oldest migration that we can think of. And then, my family, for example, moved. Um, my parents had to leave here in the early 90s. And so, they weren't, the employment at the time, there was no employment. My dad was looking for jobs. My mom was looking and they couldn't. So, at 2 years old, I left. And I remember, thinking to myself, I want to look up the data on this, but I'm pretty sure it was like that. I think there was a big migration around then. And then more recently, after Huracan Maria, after the pandemic is another big event that happened. But Centro PR at Hunter, they have a website, and they do such a great job of showing us the numbers. And I also know that ¿cómo se llama ellos? Sí, Centro Investigativo,
Centro de Periodismo Investigativo.
sí, They also have been doing reports, like news reports, journalistic reports that are about the diaspora and what happens to them once they're over there, especially recent migrations, like when it comes to they moved out there 5 years ago and now they're facing homelessness, for example. And so I think these conversations is really important to be able to say, you know, there is a history of migration because of colonialism, because of the structural problems, because of the healthcare issues that, you know, end up a lot of a lot of doctors have left and things like that. So I think, you know, in terms of like the migration and understanding, like why do we need content in English as well? And it's part of that, because once you're over there, all you're listening to, everything is in English. And so then going back to Spanish language content or Spanish news can be a little bit difficult. That's at least my theory. But I know that there's people over there. Por ejemplo, mi papá, él habla español todo el tiempo. He is always speaking in Spanish. And so I remember anytime I'm home in Florida, like I go and I'm immediately like, it's all Spanish. And even the news that he listens to is in Spanish. Everything he listens to, in terms of like, he goes straight to Spanish, like Univision, all these channels that are in Spanish. But I do think that there's, especially the young people do need more, at least I would say, in staying informed in English. So yeah, so anyway, that's why I'm really glad to dig into some of the conversations you wanted to have on like what is happening right now.
Yeah. And I think also because of that language barrier, it can also, that disconnect can sometimes also lead to just people either on the one hand idealizing or thinking things are a lot worse than they are on
Yes.
either side, of
Yeah.
the Atlantic Ocean, in the sense
Mm-hmm.
that, here in Puerto Rico, how informed could you be about, whatever struggles Puerto Ricans are facing in the US?
Exactly.
And not some people go there and they do really well. That's my other dog now. But there's a little bit of everything. And um so anyways, so give me a second because this is
No
getting
worries,
really
it's
annoying.
okay. Take your time. I was gonna say, you know, I
Oh,
thought that was really interesting what you just said, like
yeah.
your point on that, you know, sometimes it leads to like missed perspectives, or sort of like perspectives that could be very biased in terms of like, oh, it's really bad in Puerto Rico, there's this happening and that happening. And so it leads to a perception that's really negative sometimes, for sure. And I think there's also on the flip side, I you know, we can also kind of talk about this for a long time, but it's just also the perspective of people who say that, like, you know, the diaspora might come to Puerto Rico and have already this mindset of certain things that are not true, you know, or, you know, I think sometimes that's a little bit of a cultural thing, because if you're raised out there under like the American narrative and things like that, sometimes there's these like weird or perspectives that you might have or that people might exhibit when they visit, that I think could be, you know, incorrect or can lead to like misunderstandings and things, and sometimes to even worse, you know, like really bad misunderstandings. But I do think that, you know, that's why I think it's important to talk through like what those are. And I think especially now when we're talking about what's been going on in the political side, and the social issues here, I think it really helps to just have these spaces. So
Oh, yeah, definitely. So yeah, so one of the things like I've met people from the diaspora who, like, their parents or their grandparents left, like, let's say in the 40s, or even earlier. There were migrations before that too, but
there were.
so what their grandparents lived when they lived here was so, it's not what Puerto Rico is today, and it's
So
not
different.
that things are great in Puerto Rico. There's like things are terrible right now, but it's not. But it's I don't think it would be fair to compare it to what it was like in the 40s or the 30s,
Very
and
different.
it was, and I don't, in terms of gravity, people could make whatever arguments they want, but it's a different reality in a lot of in many senses. So um I just wanted to start talking a little bit about. I want to talk about what's going on now, but I figured something that's kind of important to get to what's going on now, and I'm just kind of picking a starting point, because you could keep going back
Oh yeah.
further and further. But
Yeah.
I figured a good starting point was the 2024 elections in Puerto Rico.
Yeah.
In the U.S., it was crazy, right? The election cycle was crazy in the U.S., but it was
Yeah.
crazy here too. And so obviously, what happened here, it's not gonna make it to the U.S. Why would it? Like that, they were busy over there with
Yeah,
their
they were
own
a
stuff.
little busy
So
with some kind of, I don't know, it was like it was imploding. Like before my eyes, I
yeah,
feel like everything was just,
yeah,
it's
yeah.
like when you watch a horrible train wreck, you're like, this is crazy. Oh, it's getting worse.
It still is.
And
It still
so
is. Yeah.
and I don't mean to laugh because it's also serious, but it's we have to laugh to not cry and to not scream in just like the
Oh yeah,
sheer
it's just funny
horror.
to me how wild it is, but it's terrible. Like I'm not
It's
laughing
really,
at the
yeah,
actual stuff
yeah.
that's
No,
going on.
agreed. I think we're laughing just out of just like how could this be happening? But yeah, I agree. I think people were so I wouldn't call it distracted, but it's just like it is such a huge thing and like what the implications of it, we're seeing it right now and just how everything is kind of disintegrating in real time. But we knew, I think a lot of people knew, and that's why they were so focused because they knew that this election was going to create havoc just across the world. Like it's obviously we're seeing it, right? Even just the other 2 weeks ago, was it 2 weeks ago, a week ago? I can't even tell. Just the Canada, what was going on with the tariffs and things like that. But anyway, but going back to your point, right? So
Yeah,
they were distracted, but things were happening here that were important to talk about as well. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So I think you know, for the past, I don't want to get into a whole history of like the political parties, right? For
Yeah.
decades, there's been two main parties in Puerto Rico, which are the Partido Popular, which we call
Mm-hmm.
the Populares here in Puerto Rico is what we call them. It's not because they're like the popular, the
They're not
popular, like
popular.
the
Yeah,
cool
right.
party. But
Popular.
so the El Partido Popular, which are
Uh,
the PPD, are the las siglas, like the initials.
mhm.
And they're the ones that are in favor of the status quo, right? That was the
Yeah.
party of Luis Muñoz
Keep
Marin, who
Puerto
created
Rico as a commonwealth. Yeah,
yeah, he
exactly.
established the Commonwealth. Which something interesting about that, like a side note, is that in the U.S. he sold it as a Commonwealth, like that's the name he used in English, because it
Right.
was kind of meaningless. Because it's like the Commonwealth of
It's
Massachusetts and things like that. It
so
doesn't
funny. It's
it doesn't
meaningless.
mean it's just very broad. But in
Yeah.
Puerto Rico, he called it Estado Libre Asociado, which is free
Ah,
associated
yeah.
state. If he had called
Free
it that in
state.
English, the Congress would have been like, no, no, what are you talking
I
like the
love
free
that note.
state?
Yeah, it's
No,
true.
like
Oh,
that's not
free
what.
state?
So
Mm-mm.
there was a disconnect there, right? And he sort of sold it to Puerto Rico like as an autonomy, and also like people voted for it more like it was either take it or leave it. Like there weren't other options, right? The option
Yeah.
was like
Yeah,
you approve
thank
the
you for saying that.
Constitution and the
There weren't
Commonwealth,
options.
or
Yeah.
you so slightly better than it was, or the same as it is
Yeah.
right now. So like
Yeah.
those were the options that people were voting at when people approved this in at that time. But that's kind of besides the point. But the point is that so there's the Partido Popular,
That's the popular. Yeah,
and
they're
they're
blue.
yeah
They're blue,
they're
right?
red,
They're
they're red.
represented by the color blue, right? That's
What? No,
I
they're
wanted.
red. El PNP son
They're
los
the
azules.
red. Okay,
Yeah, yeah,
sorry. See, this is
yeah,
why
yeah.
it's important, and it's funny because I've been watching this, but I still get them confused.
You know what
But right,
happens
so
to me because the Republicans are the red
the red,
in the
yeah,
states and Democrats are blue. But in my
exactly.
brain, and it's not really you can't really. They're so different parties. You can't really
They're
do
all
that with the
different. Yeah,
parties.
they can't
But in my
compare them.
mind, like
Yeah.
I flip them in the U.S. because in my mind, because the populares are red. In my mind wants to think that the Democrats should be red
Yes.
and the Republicans should be
I
blue.
have the
So
this is
so
so
so that's
funny.
what.
That's my problem. Yeah, because then now that you're saying, okay, so they're represented by the color red, then now let's talk about the other party. You go. You
Right,
lead.
the PNP, El Partido Nuevo Progresista, the
Yep.
New Progressive Party in English. That
Yep.
that's the those are the pro state. That's the pro statehood party. So that's the
Yes.
party that's identified with blue. And so there's a lot of Democrats in like these parties. Like we don't have Democrat and Republican parties, but both in the Partido Popular and in the PNP, you'll have people that identify as Democrats or Republicans. Not everyone does, but some
Right.
people do. And I think I would assume there's more Republicans in the PNP than in El Partido Popular. Not sure if
Yes.
that's true, but
I would
that's kind of
assume
like
that
my
too.
assumption.
Yeah.
I would assume El Partido Popular it leans more Democrat within the people that identify with the U.S. party. And there's also the PIP, El Partido Independentista Puertorriqueño, which is the out of the parties that participate in the elections, that's the second oldest party. The oldest party really is
Mm,
El Partido Nacionalista, but that one doesn't participate in elections. Like the oldest one that's still in
okay.
existence today, because that one's like 103
And
years old, some almost.
to
Um,
explain to people why they don't participate in the elections.
oh yeah, so they don't believe that yeah, I guess that's an important point. They
Yeah,
don't believe
yeah.
that in a this might be an oversimplification, but they don't believe that there's really like a legitimate democracy while we are a colony. So
Yes, I happen to agree with that. In that sense, that I think I remember when I first heard that they don't participate in elections or that they don't believe. It sort of it goes back to the question that I always ask, at least on my page, which is there a democracy? Like there isn't. It's a colony and it's being exploited, and so that's why I think it's important to understand like these all these parties, while they do have a function and they we can go into that, but just at the end of the day, the ultimate power in terms of what happens on the island goes to Congress. That's why we have a junta. That's why we have a board that was not elected in order to control everything, and which has adversely affected every sector of the island in terms of like the educational system, the medical system, privatizing everything, really being a part of why there is a migration, why there is more diaspora now than there have ever been. So anyway, going back.
yeah, yeah.
So
So
PIP
they
and now the sort of
I
the
think
third
it's also
party.
important to contextualize it in the sense that when they decided this in the 30s, we
Yeah.
did not. I mean, the Partido Nacionalista, the Nationalist Party, when they
The
determined
national
this in the 30s, we did not elect the governor. The first governor was
no, I
elected in
believe.
48. So 50 years after the U.S. took over, that's when we had the first elections for governor. And
Right.
I believe I could be wrong about this because I always mix up those dates, those years a little bit, but I believe there still wasn't universal suffrage either.
Mm-hmm.
So not sure if women could vote at that point in time, but illiterate people could not vote.
Mm,
So there was also when they determined this, there was also beyond like if you get more specific beyond like the broad argument for like colonialism and democracy, like
right.
on a more specific level, there really wasn't we didn't have that much democracy. There were only
Mm-hmm.
certain positions that we could elect. So I think that's also important in that context. Like we could not elect the head of state. We could not
Yeah.
elect the executive. And so there's El Partido Nacionalista, right? That's from 1922. So that one's still around, but they don't participate in elections. So then you have El PIP, which is the second oldest party. That's the pro-independence party, and so for the longest time, El PIP the PIP did not have a lot of support in the elections. The first elections, the first time around, they were like the second electoral force. Still, Los Populares they won by a majority. But in the PNP, the Pro Statehood Party, did not win an elections until '68, and they formed
On
later.
the 68.
So
So the 70s is really when they started to gain momentum.
yeah,
Wow, that
yeah. So
wasn't really
68
that
is
long
when
ago.
Ferre, yeah, that's when
Yeah.
Ferre becomes governor. So that's the first time they win for governor, at least. And
Yeah.
so these two parties, Popular and PNP, have been basically the dominant parties for the longest time in Puerto Rico, and
Yeah.
power has sort of gone back and forth between them. For the past like 3 election cycles, it's been PNP has held the executive, like right, like the governor has
The
been
progressives. Yeah. The
yeah, yeah,
Partido Progresista. Yeah.
yeah, the pro statehood government. So and in the legislative branches, it's the majority will sort of maybe flip a little bit who has it, but the governor has been PNP for 3 elections. So, but also something else that has happened in Puerto Rico in recent years is that there's two other parties now. So we have
Mm-hmm.
five parties in Puerto Rico now. We have Victoria Ciudadana, and we also have Proyecto Dignidad. So Victoria Ciudadana is more on the sometimes I feel a little weird saying leftist and left and right because it's
Yeah.
not really like what those words actually mean.
is
and
different.
don't necessarily apply. They might apply to some candidates, but they don't really apply to. But let's say Victoria Ciudadana is more on the left spectrum. Just
Yeah,
like on the PIP, el Partido Independentista, also like they're on that spectrum to the left side.
right.
But I would say really they'll try to portray them like, extreme leftists. They're really very center moderate
More
leftists when you
center
look at
moderate.
their
Yeah. Thank you
policy.
for mentioning that. I think sometimes people get confused because again, like you said, a lot of the diaspora who may not know about like the different parties here, it is very hard and when you already have a framework based on the left and the right, it's can be very hard. But I do like when you say moderate too, because I do see sort of like that central or like understanding that like in order to really understand the parties, you have to go into their policies. You have to know how they plan to run the country. So it is, while we can sit here and probably talk for hours about it, it is important to understand that like to really understand them, we probably have to spend another episode just understanding like how would they govern if they were leading, Puerto Rico. So anyway, but going back to right, so Victoria Ciudadana is more in the sort of middle to left,
Yeah.
and then the other one, Proyecto
Proyecto
Dignidad,
Dignidad. Those are the more right, more to the
super
right,
conservative. Yeah, that's what
especially
I
when
would.
it comes to like
Yeah,
I don't. We're not. This isn't really gonna be a podcast about the political parties.
yeah,
I just wanted to talk a little bit about the elections, but like I'm just saying it to the listeners because just in case
it's
they're
new.
worried that we're really gonna start like trashing politicians or something like that. That's not.
Not
Um,
this time.
that's not the point. Right, so like but Proyecto Dignidad is more to the right, like PMP a lot of the
So how
times
did
will
they
sort of
start
be
though?
what.
Sorry to interrupt. I'm very curious. How did the Proyecto Dignidad start? Because I don't
I
think
don't
I
know
had.
the story behind how it formed, but it formed in
Okay,
the last election cycle.
just in the last
um
election. Yeah,
yeah,
Victoria
yeah, yeah.
Movimiento. Perdón.
Also the last elections. Okay, so I wanted to make a brief pause in the video before we keep going with it because I realized I misspoke. When I was saying the last elections, in my mind I was saying las elecciones pasadas, like the past elections, like the 2020 election cycle. So Proyecto Dignidad and Victoria Ciudadana, they formed for the last election cycle, for I'm doing it again, for the 2020 election cycle. So I think the way I said it sounds like I was referring to the 2024 election cycle, and I think I created some confusion in the conversation because of that. But anyways, just wanted to clear that up, and yeah, let's get back to the conversation.
Also
Yeah,
the last election,
yeah,
right?
because
Okay.
but a lot of their political candidates were around before running for like
I
Lugaro.
remember that.
She ran
Yeah.
for governor. Was it 2 or 3 times? I can't remember now. At least twice. One
Yeah.
time it wasn't under Victoria Ciudadana. The second time it was because that's when the
Okay.
Victoria Ciudadana formed. And so
Right.
Manuel Natal, he was in the popular El Partido Popular, and he switched to Victoria Ciudadana.
Okay.
And there were others like Bernabe. He also ran for governor at least once. He
Okay.
had a different
This
party
is
before.
like
That's yeah.
the last three election cycles have been like kind of
But it
crazy in
feels
in
it
that
feels like
sense.
that party has been around for longer, just because the people involved in that party have been in politics
Have been in
for longer.
politics, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So at
So
least or at least participating in elections. Yeah,
okay.
yeah,
So interesting. Okay, yeah. And it's funny because I've been watching it but not as closely perhaps, and I think because
yeah,
of your context of having been born and raised here, you've seen how these parties have sort of how things
yeah,
have
yeah.
progressed, a little bit more of the history obviously. I think yeah, do you want to go into a little bit as well on like what happened with the votes and
Yeah,
how
yeah, that's what I
the
wanted
third
to. Yeah,
party
yeah, yeah.
yeah,
This is
I'm
a very
curious about.
rambling explanation for the background that I've given, but
No, you did
the point
great. I
is,
like
yeah, the point is that the last few elections things have really changed, and we could go into Ricky Renuncia and all of that. That was a big, that was a.
another time.
I
Yeah.
don't really want to get into that now because that's again that's a whole episode on its own. But there were
Yeah.
big shifts, with Promesa in
Mhm.
2014. Was that when that passed? Maybe around that
Yes.
time. I think Ley Promesa when the junta was established, and maybe, and it was so you had that, you had Hurricane Maria and Irma and Ricky
Yeah.
Renuncia, the earthquakes, but then COVID came, so that kind of. But there were these big things that happened that I think have had an impact on how people view things, mostly because of I think some of it because of the event itself. Like I think Promesa is one thing, but others, like for example, Hurricane Maria, it's not that the hurricane made people angry. It's just how the government responded to it. But
Yeah.
in at the same time that that was happening, because some things just were happening at more or less around that time or a little before that, you had these groups that were usually in the minority politically,
Hmm.
started gaining a little more strength. Like, for example, Lugaro, she ran as an independent. There have been independent candidates before. There were, not third part, like fourth and fifth parties and things that have existed before. She wasn't the first one, but she got more votes in that election that people were expecting. A lot more. Not enough to win. She wasn't
Right.
close to
It
the winner,
surprised people.
but it
Yeah.
surprised people, and I think it opened people's minds up to the idea that you didn't necessarily, that maybe a political candidate that wasn't in one of the main two parties could be a viable option. And so anyways, I'm gonna jump ahead now to
Yeah,
the
yeah.
last
Let's jump
elections. The
into
last
like what
elections,
happened
yeah,
this
the last elections was something really interesting, because all of a sudden the runner up, the people that what became the second political force, the biggest threat to PNP winning the elections again for the first time in history, was not El Partido Popular. Like, that was always the elections was between the red and the
the
blue party,
Popular
and
and
this
yeah,
time
red and blue.
it was between Juan Dalmau from the PIP and Jennifer Gonzalez, right? Del PIP, they made an alliance with Victoria Ciudadana, which was really complicated because they, they couldn't really technically form an alliance, so they had to ask people to vote for candidates, like just mix the votes and the
Mixed.
ballots.
Yeah.
It made it really tricky because people aren't really used to voting that way, and so it made it really complicated.
Yeah.
But the point is that it was something that we haven't seen before.
Yeah. I
It
do
was a
remember
big
when the
shift.
polls, like I was watching the news and the polls leading up to, and I was just thinking to myself, no puede ser. Como everybody was just like edge of their seat. Like, I think it's happening. And every time more polls came out here showing like who's ahead, it was either Jennifer Gonzalez or Juan Dalmau. And then it just kind of, and it sort of became, at least for me in the last week, it became clear that you're right. Like all of the events that you mentioned, like the pandemic, Huracan Maria, the way people have been sort of also organizing. Like I think part of this is like there have been a lot of great, groups of people organizing. The political parties have organized, of course, but I think community level, people are having these conversations and questioning like, why is this way? This isn't normal. And I always hear that here, like the conversation around, oh, you know they've made this normal. It's not actually normal, the way that we're being treated, the way that they're, anyway. But we that could
Yeah,
be its own conversation. But yeah, so for the first time, a third party was very close to winning, and that just kind of like, and I remember people in the diaspora were also paying attention. So it wasn't, yes, we did have like everything that was going in the US was also, but I do remember seeing a lot of the diaspora being very concerned of like what is happening in terms of the elections here too. So
yeah, and but you are right. Like, the conversation has shifted a lot in the past few years. There's a lot of stuff that 10 or 15 years ago you would have said, and people would have thought you were crazy, and now
mm-hmm.
it's not crazy. And I mean, like just somebody saying that they're pro independence 15 years ago would have been like, are you crazy? Like, that's insane. And
Yeah.
now, there's still people that think that way, but it's not that way anymore. But the thing with
Yeah.
like Dalmau is, they, again, he is sort of like, he had a very moderate platform in terms of what he was proposing. There wasn't anything,
It's a good
like,
point.
he wasn't even like pushing for independence during this time around. They have that platform for the constituent assembly and all of that. I don't want to get into that now, but really it was more like a democratic process that they were pushing. But even then they were saying like, this isn't something that's really going to happen in the next 4 years, and I think that's really like how it would have been. But
Yeah.
the so in the end, Jennifer Gonzalez won. Now, something that I don't want to know if you want to speak to that, but like, there were a lot of allegations of fraud. A lot of
Yeah.
questionable things happened during this
I would love
election.
I would love to go into that, but I know that's going to take us on a huge tangent. What I did want to say is that, just we could say it broadly, many people questioned whether the election results were valid and whether or not there was fraud involved. And this was, all over social media at the time. People were sharing screenshots, people who were involved in counting the votes, and they were claiming, they had a very they were very angry because of the way that they were being treated, in the sense that the representatives of the Partido Nuevo Progresista, so the progressives, the new progressives, were very aggressive, in the sense that sometimes they would not want to count certain votes, and so it was very clear that there could have been something going on. And then just recently, there was a news article, I think I shared it with you, that said that in Cataño, in the town of Cataño, people came out like confirming that the votes that they put in were paid for, so that they got paid to vote a certain way. And so obviously that's fraud. Obviously that there's something going on here. And I personally, and this is just my opinion, I'm not trying to change anyone's mind, or talk conspiracies, but I do believe that there was fraud. Just based on like the general conversation. And also there was this sense that night, the night that people did kind of like Jennifer Gonzalez came out saying she had won, and not all of the votes had been counted. And so I thought to myself, well, how can you be so positive that you had won? And to me, that signaled that there's probably some movements in play. But that's my opinion. I don't want to speak for everyone here. I think there was also a lot of people who just were like, well, it is what it is. A lot of people voted the wrong way. Like I had friends who were like, can't believe you would vote for the party that has done all this damage, and it's clearly documented what they've done, everything from Ricky Rosselló to now. Like people are like, how can you vote for the party that very clearly does not care for you, respect your interests, does not represent you? They represent outside interests. So yeah. Anyways,
So,
sorry for that.
yeah,
I get
no,
really passionate when I talk
no, I
about
don't,
this.
I
But
don't,
yeah,
no, I think it's good when a guest on a podcast likes to speak. It's bad when the opposite happens, when
true,
when they
true.
just give like brief yes and no answers. So,
But it's very
yeah,
frustrating. I think
yeah,
like the election results were, to me, just like it's a lot of people are very frustrated by the final result.
yeah. It was very disheartening, and yeah, there was a lot of fraud. There were people they would go house to house in certain districts where the PNP thought they might lose, and
Mm,
they
intimidate?
started discounting people, like removing people from the what
Oh,
do you say, like the people that were registered to vote. They would say like, oh, this person
I
doesn't live here
remember.
because they went to their house screaming their name, and just they weren't there at that point, or they didn't
Yeah,
want to, or they were there and they didn't want to identify with some random stranger who wasn't telling them who what he was there for, and they would write, he doesn't live here. And
yeah.
then they wouldn't inform them that they were going through this process. And so people were getting on election day there and realizing that they weren't registered to vote, even though they were registered to vote, right? They just
They
eliminated them from the
registered,
list.
but then
And so,
yeah. So I
yeah.
didn't know that I didn't know that a party could do that. Like I had no idea that was a real process, that
So
somebody could go to your house.
you can do that, but apparently, but you are supposed to notify the person. And something that they had changed on the last, when they changed the electoral code in 2020, I think it was,
Mhm.
they extended the deadline for that. So it was just like to like the day before the elections or something like that. Whereas
Wow.
before there was a, there was a buffer in between, the
Right.
like there was some time in
Where you
between.
could, yeah, you can
So yeah,
contest.
so there were certain districts, at least in San Juan, where like the alliance candidates, like the ones from Victoria Ciudadana or the PIP, had a real
Yeah.
chance to win. But we're talking like there were close margins.
Yeah.
So
Very close. Yeah. Yeah.
you could discount enough people, and basically they were targeting mostly like college age students, because these were like this is like Rio Piedras. It's almost like a college town in a way, because
Yeah.
the UP is right there, like the University of Puerto Rico. So they were doing that. There were a lot of different things that they did. It was really complicated registering to vote this year. There were a lot of
Yep.
problems. There were problems with the machines that counted the votes too. There were like, these are just a few of the things that happened.
Hmm.
There were people, like, I can't remember how many dead people were registered to vote. There were people that were showing up as registered to vote in the PNP primaries that are not members of the PNP party. Like most notoriously the grandmother, I think,
Hmm.
of the candidate for resident commissioner who won, who's from the Popular Party, Pablo
Uh
Jose
huh.
Hernandez. Her
She-
grandmother appeared like she had like she had voted in the PNP primaries, and she came out on the news and saying like, "What? Like I obviously did not vote here,"
I
something
did
like
not
that. It was
vote for
something
that
like that.
party.
Yeah, yeah.
So
So there
so
were a lot of
that
sketchy
right
things that
there,
happened.
that shows, I mean, I didn't know that piece of news, but that shows me that there is, at least my this is my perception, that the trust in the system is very low now. Like, people do not trust the system. I would not trust the system. I mean, everything you're describing, if it's like one or two cases, but this is widespread. And the fact that there's also long lists of like literally dead people voting, that, I mean, that says it all. And I remember speaking about the investigative, again, Centro
Centro de Periodismo
Investigativo.
Investigativo. Yeah.
Yes. So just seeing the reports that they've put out, I think my biggest thing though with all that is like all of this news came out and people felt helpless because they're like, well, what recourse do we have to, say, another round of elections? Like, what, I think that's been my curiosity. I don't know what you think about this, but just like, what do people do in this kind of situation outside of, sorry, I'm laughing because I'm
No.
like, all I could see is like people, como Enrique Renuncia, like just take
Yeah.
to the streets and say, we want another election because there's clearly fraud, like
Yeah.
that's the only thing I
So
can think of.
yeah, I don't know how you, but this takes us back to like, Partido Nacionalista argument, like where
Yeah.
is like the democracy, like what,
Where's the
like
democracy?
how do you prove something like this, like the like I don't know, like voting is anonymous for a reason, right? It
Hmm.
protects you from persecution and a lot of different things. But on the other hand, you can't really know if your vote was counted the way that you voted it. So like
Yeah,
it gets
exactly.
it's if you steal elections, it's how do you prove it? That's really really
There needs
problematic.
to
Now
be
I don't know.
oversight of
I
it.
don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't tell who won legitimately in the sense that maybe they won anyway. Like just maybe it wasn't a landslide, right? Like maybe they would have
Right.
won anyway because it's not like the PNP party does not have support. So I think the problem, like the problem for me isn't so much whether or not Jennifer Gonzalez won, because in the sense that she very realistically could have won, right?
Hmm.
The margins might have been different, but she might have won anyway. But I think the issue really is more like on the fact that it's questionable,
Hmm.
right? The fact that you
The
can't know for
legitimacy
sure,
of the
like the
candidate.
fact that
Yeah.
there's so much doubt now on the democratic process in Puerto Rico, that maybe some people have always thought this way, because I know I've spoken to people who have always thought that this was fraudulent, that the elections in Puerto Rico were fraudulent. So
Mm.
but I think the in general terms, like the general mentality is that the elections were trustworthy, right? And all of a sudden now there's like this doubt cast upon the entire institution, and I don't know what impact that has on the mentality of people. Like you could think, like for example, the fact that every time something goes wrong, there'll be people that saying, well, you know what, that's the Puerto Ricans fault because they voted for so and so.
Mm.
And so for me it's a little bit like, wait, if this guy lied to people and they voted for him because they believed him, so like, is it really the fault of the person that believed them? Like,
Right.
I know some people might say yes, but I don't think so. You know.
Okay.
So there's all this stuff that goes on, like like arguments that, like people that want to get away with stuff would always come up with an argument to get away with it. So they'll always twist stuff and do that. Right now, I think what is interesting about this, and getting now to some of the stuff that I was thinking we could talk about what's going
Yeah,
on, is
no,
that
but I think this is
yeah.
great that you're kind of giving us this like overview of the elections because, again, just like over there, just like in the US, the elections and the results are creating this ripple effect, of things that are happening that are just getting worse and worse. And so with the, putting Jennifer Gonzalez in, right, there's been a ripple effect in terms of what now she is moving towards. And I remember I did a video on my Instagram where I was like to me, Jennifer Gonzalez is a very dangerous candidate because she spent years in Washington. So she knows how these sneaky, sorry, I don't know if I can curse here, but like
Yeah,
these
yeah.
sneaky politicians work. They know how these slimy politicians work. She moves like them. She tries to emulate them, you know, and in a lot of ways, I feel, you know, a lot of people are very angry with her here. And like, at least in my circles, like they see how bad she can be. And some of them even know some of her history, including, I remember one report mentioning that she had like, you know, she had at one point these employees that were not real, like ghost employees that you know, she was getting money for employees that didn't exist. And so someone who
Yeah, she
is
once made
so
like she spent like so much money. I can't remember now the news exactly, but she spent like so much money making like a gold bathroom when she was like
oh
in
yeah,
the what
doesn't
was she
surprise me.
representative or senator or something. She made like a golden bathroom, like a marble bathroom or something. She spent, I can't
Of
remember how much
course.
money. That was a scandal like 10 years ago or
Wow.
something.
I
Yeah,
didn't know that one, but
yeah,
that doesn't surprise me at all.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
You can look it up later on because I'm pretty sure I'm not saying it right. But
I'm gonna
it's
try
something
not to because
it's something along those lines. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
this kind of stuff I just like I can't. This is it's so it borders on like the absurd, but it's just really
No, it
it's
doesn't border
really
on it. It is absurd.
it's
Like
absolutely absurd.
yeah.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely absurd that's actually a thing. Wow. Yeah, no, so besides that, you know, all of this history that she has that has made people really angry. It's also just to me, you know, I wanted to say this because I feel like it very much has a lot to do with diaspora in the sense that, you know, she went out there ¿cómo se dice?
Comisionado
Residente.
residente.
Right. So some people might know about this, some people might not, but just like she's the representative of Puerto Rico in Washington.
Yeah,
And
it's
so
a
she's
non-voting member of Congress that Puerto Rico has. They can present
thank you.
legislation, but they can't vote on it. Yeah.
Exactly. So you're there for years talking to all of these politicians, trying to make a case for why, you know, they should see to me at its simplest level, to me, it's trying to say, oh, Puerto Ricans are human too. You should treat them with dignity. Here's, you know, can you do this, do that? And her main focus was obviously statehood. So she spent so much taxpayer money into trying to convince Congress to make Puerto Rico a state. And that's, we can go into that later. But part of the reason I want to mention this is because for a lot of Puerto Ricans that are in the diaspora, there's this like constant pressure to assimilate. And so for me, looking at her, even though she's like absolutely infuriates me, like everything she does and everything she says, what I do see in her is this person who really is trying so hard to prove her worth to a group of white men who will never see her as human, who will never see her as worthy of their attention or their time. And yet she tries so hard and and you can even argue it's just for money. She's trying to get more money. It's greed and this and that. But at the end of the day, her attempt to be in any way, you know, friends with them or buddy with them is always going to fail because the way that things move over there is, oh yeah, we'll allow you in the room, but we're never going to listen to you. We're never going to give you a platform. We're never going, you know, we can talk about like also the executive order that we were, you know, mentioning where like, how is it that now there's this conversation around independence, you know, executive order for independence for Puerto Rico. But, you know, going to like her purpose was always to go and try to make, you know, the case that Puerto Ricans should be included in civil rights, even though, you know, the to me, her party represents everything against, you know, civil liberties in Puerto Rico. But anyway, I wanted to say that because I do feel like there is this sense in me, just like to see her constantly and people always making memes about how she's trying to be friends with Trump and things and of that nature. But it's really very clear to me that like no matter what she does, she's not going to get anywhere, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, I don't think she's really trying to get Puerto Rico to be a state. I think most of the politicians in the PNP.
It's
I'm not
just a
talking
way
about the. I'm
to
not talking about the people like people that vote for the PNP party, but like the like a lot of the politicians, they don't really want to change the status of Puerto Rico because the status quo is how they and their donors get rich, right? Like their interest
exactly.
is how
It
it
is
works.
agreed.
So
Yeah,
like
it's a greed thing.
yeah, yeah. So like I think one of the benefits that a resident commissioner has is the fact that they're over there and we're over here, and we don't know what the fuck they're doing over there. So like they just say
Mm.
whatever. Like they can come here and say they know this many people in Congress and they approve so many funds, which really were coming anyway, but they claim that that they achieved them. And a lot of it is like really the resident commissioner's job isn't like it can be right to like go and push for a different kind of status for Puerto Rico, but that's not what they're sent there to do. Like that's not like the main responsibility, you know. It's more like, you know, it's just representing whatever issues Puerto Rico has. Now obviously a big issue for Puerto Rico is the fact that it's a colony, but really like, you know, that's not like like they're not there
The
for
reason it
that.
was created,
Yeah,
right?
they're supposed to be doing a lot of stuff, like, and so I don't think she really did much of anything. But the interesting
So
thing
how many
about,
years was she? Do you know how many? Sorry to
I
interrupt,
think,
but
was
how
it
many
8
years
years?
was she there?
I think 8 years maybe. I think because
Yeah,
she
because
she was resident commissioner under Ricky, and then
I
under
remember that.
Pierluisi.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah,
So
so that's,
going,
oh
yeah, but so going into that, so her whole, platform has been, let's talk about statehood in order to sort of obscure the fact that she's actually just trying to find contracts and deals and funding, federal funding, specifically to that ends up going into more, her party or the people that work with her party.
yeah, this is what people say here, like los amiguitos del alma is the phrase that people
Exactly.
say a lot of the time. Like it's just to make certain people rich and to make herself rich, and you know,
Yes.
allegedly, I should say allegedly, right? Just to like
I would
allegedly.
I agree. I try to be, but I'm
Yeah.
just I'm very as you can see, I
So
get really angry because I feel that these are issues that end up affecting people.
yeah,
In
at the very least, let's say she's not corrupt. I think still like the main thing is just like just the position, like the title. Like I
the
want to be
title.
commissioner, resident commissioner. I want to be governor. Like since she's
Yeah.
been governor, I think no legislation has been passed yet in Puerto Rico. So
Yeah.
and she's been governor since like January 2nd. Like the governor takes office here before the president in the U.S. So, but what I wanted to get to a little bit is that um Jennifer, like a lot of politicians in the PNP are Democrats, right? Pierluisi was Democrat. He even did fundraisers for Kamala and Biden last
Mm,
year here in Puerto Rico. And but Jennifer Gonzalez is a Republican. She claims to
yes.
be Republican,
She
right?
claims,
And
yeah.
she supported Trump. And it's interesting because there was this really like giant double discourse that she was doing, because she kept saying that she supported Trump, but she was also talking about how many federal funds she brought to Puerto Rico and how she was gonna get even more federal funds to come to Puerto Rico, even though I think anybody who follows like American politics knows that the Republicans are the ones who want less government spending, right? They're
Exactly.
the ones
Yeah.
that, you know, again, I know this is a spectrum, so there'll be more moderate Republicans and more like radical right Republicans, but like, you know, they're the ones that will be talking about, you know, cutting like social programs and things like
Cutting social
that, like
programs, right.
like
Cutting
that
funding in
totally.
general.
And that was a
Yeah.
big part of Trump's platform, you know.
Yep.
So so she was saying two things that don't go together.
Why do you think
um
that is? I'm
because
actually I
people in
want to
Puerto Rico don't know. Like people in Puerto Rico aren't following American elections very closely, right? So
yeah.
it's not, she can get away with it. And so she
Mm,
was saying that. And you know, I think that was a weakness of the opposition, is that when she said that, they replied with, you know, read Project 25 2025, things like that. And you know, and I always thought, stop talking about Project 2025, be more specific, like say the things that are
yeah.
in Project 2025.
Just as
Like
you described it,
Project
actually, with
2025
great.
sounds like a conspiracy theory. It's not, but it
It's
sounds like
not,
the
but it
name. Yeah,
sounds
but
that
the
way.
name sounds
Yeah.
like it is. So like, you know,
Hmm.
but yeah, so she was saying that. And one of the things that I think is, like, in a way, I'm glad that Juan Dalmau lost and Jennifer Gonzalez won, in the sense that Trump is now cutting like all these federal funds and all this kind
All
of
of
stuff. And she was saying that Juan Dalmau and the alliance were the ones that were going to cut the federal funds, right?
it was
Which was
scaring people.
also
Yeah,
weird, because
I remember that.
she was saying that they were socialists.
Right.
but then she's saying that they're gonna cut like like social programs, which is
Right.
also like weird. But like that's what she was saying, right? And that I think that was
I
one of the
can't.
arguments that won her support, was
Yeah.
instilling that fear in people, right? So but if he had won, he would be taking all the blame for the stuff that Trump is doing, that we have no say over. We have no say
Right.
over any of this. So the fact that it was her that won, and it's under her that this stuff is happening, means that, yeah. And not only that it's under her, but that she supported Trump, right? Because if she
Right.
hadn't, then I think she had a like an out, but she
But
supported them.
now it's yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
so thank you for saying that. It's like so going into they use fear as a tactic to try to get people to vote for them, saying like, hey, we're gonna make sure that we keep those federal funds, that we, don't make away with them, even though in a lot of ways they're talking against like socialism and yet wanting more money. But that's so it's really interesting because they used fear, now they've won. Do you feel like because of the position she's in, right, where she claimed that she would keep it, and now they're doing away with these federal funds, it's I mean, I think it's undeniable that the party is facing a critical point, right? Because a lot of people now in Puerto Rico are going to say, oh, you didn't keep your promises. So I'm kind of curious how you see people reacting for the next election, in terms of like, do you even see her doing a second, being able to continue in the next election as
So
governor?
there's a few variables, I guess. One of that I can think of now. One of them is that, and this is one of the stuff that I wanted to get into today, but it's like I'm not too clear. Like I know all the stuff that Trump and Elon Musk and Doge, like all the stuff that they're gutting right in the
Mm-hmm.
U.S., and
Yeah.
that obviously also applies to Puerto Rico. But I haven't, and maybe it's been reported and it's just not showing up on my feed. I don't know, but I don't really know to what extent it has also affected Puerto Rico. I know it has. It has to. Like there's
Mm-hmm.
no way it hasn't. But I'm not too clear on what has already been hit by these cuts in Puerto Rico.
Yeah.
So and this is um, again, I'm sure it has. I'm just that's a part of it that I'm not very informed at this point. And some of it is because it's been very confusing, because I have seen some news where they say they cut this and then the next day it's back on and then the next day it's paused, and then so I'm not too clear. Like it's all been a mess, so it's kind of hard to keep track of it.
Well,
But I
yeah.
think that's one variable. It's the impact that it will have in Puerto Rico. And once people really start to feel it, then we'll see, right? But
Yeah.
the other one is, you know, if the fraud in the elections that we believe happened actually happened, then I don't know if anybody else is ever going to win the elections. So,
Mm,
but on the other side of it is also like, um, no, we haven't had a governor for 2 terms since like the 90s,
mm.
right? Like Pedro Rosselló was the last governor that served for two
That did
terms. After that, we've
too.
had the same party be in power
Mm.
for more than one term, but not the same governor. So
Okay.
if that pattern continues, then just Jennifer Gonzalez is just not going to be governor again.
She's
Maybe
not
just
right.
because some scandal might blow up from here to the next election cycle, that maybe she just won't run again. I don't know.
Exactly. But
So
there's
yeah,
also the very real possibility that someone else within the party ends up running and winning, right?
yeah,
Because like you said, we don't know what's going to happen if they do cut all of the funds or not. Like you said, it is chaos right now, so I think that's also interesting too. Like I do know about like the shock doctrine and how they're saying that like that's been part of it. They're saying, oh, we're going to get rid of this, but then the next day it's back on. And so I think we're gonna continue to see that for the next year or so. So I don't really know. So I think until we get to maybe like the second or third year,
yeah.
we'll be able to get on a podcast and talk about it.
Sometimes
But
I
I think
wonder
for
if,
now,
if Naomi Klein actually gave us tools to fight against this, or if she gave the Republicans a playbook.
mm, that's
Um,
interesting.
that's like
Yeah,
what I think of,
no,
like not just her, but like George
that's
Orwell
funny.
with 1984. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
No,
did he give
seriously.
us a helpful warning, or did he like give like evil
Was he
geniuses ideas? Like,
was he low key working for the other side? Yeah, no,
no,
I
no, no,
think
not that he was working for them. Like, he was trying to like help
no, no,
people,
no.
and then he
I know
ended
what
up
you
like,
mean. I'm
yeah,
just,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
but I agree. I think that a lot of this feels like they're taking these things that for for a long time we've seen in science fiction. We've seen people write books about like the strategies. I think I mean talking back to like the shock doctrine. I think like that's been going on for a
Oh
long
yeah, yeah,
time. I
yeah,
think
yeah.
she was able to kind of give it like more
Yeah.
visibility. But I
Yeah,
also think
she's
that
describing something that was happening. She didn't
yeah,
make it up as something that could happen. Yeah.
but at the same time, yeah, she's also giving it's also like just showing how it's getting more and more extreme in the sense of
Yeah.
yeah, they're throwing all these things at us. So one of those things, right? And I think you could start anywhere, but I remember we were going to talk about like all of the things that have happened since Jennifer
Yeah.
Gonzalez took office. Yeah.
Yeah. I think we'll only be able to cover a few, I think now, but
A few,
yeah,
yeah. No, and that's
so
fine. We could
I
always talk
think
about this another time too.
the federal funds things to me is interesting because like Trump seems to want to be like an emperor, right? I mean, the
Mhm.
US is an empire already, right? But he seems to really
Yes.
want to be like McKinley, right? McKinley
Yeah.
was the president that under McKinley's Puerto Rico was invaded in 1898, right? So
Mhm.
um he's talking about, Greenland's gonna be the 50 something state, and Canada is gonna be the 51st, and apparently, I guess now that I'm thinking about it, I think there's an order to it, like, so and he's gonna make all these places states and all of that.
Oh my god.
But I wonder if it's the same thing in the other, let's say, territories, to be more broad about it, but like the other colonies, like the other territories, like if the arguments around the status are the same as in Puerto Rico. In the sense, like,
Mm.
if people use I would imagine there's some differences, but I would imagine if they use some of the same arguments, um, in the sense that, like, there's two really big arguments in Puerto Rico for statehood, right? The ones
Mm.
that they always throw around. One is federal funds, and the other
Yep.
is U.S. citizenship. And Trump wants to eliminate federal funds, like a bunch of federal funds, and he wants to eliminate birthright citizenship. And Puerto Rico does not have citizenship by the Constitution; it's by a law that was passed in 1917. So it's
Yes.
not, in theory, you could eliminate that law, or amend it to eliminate, right, the citizenship to Puerto Ricans. So I'm not saying that he's gonna do that, but in theory he could, right? Or like his government could, whether it's Congress or whatever. So I wonder what impact that has for his own, like, imperial ambitions, if
Mm.
the policies that he's pursuing is actually gonna make his colonies not want to be colonies anymore.
Yes, especially because I had seen that it was a group from Puerto Rico and the diaspora that put together this and it wasn't an executive order, right? I correct me if I'm wrong, but it was like they had put together this proposal. I don't know how to call it in order to say like give him a reason why Puerto Rico should be independent and all I feel like most of the argument, and you could correct me, is that it is going to save the US money. But in a lot of the conversations I've had, it's also been like, we don't want to go down with a sinking ship. It's
Yeah,
basically the
yeah.
argument. We don't want to be a part of the
But these are
US.
people that already believed in independence. These aren't, like, I'm not,
Exactly.
like, what I was talking about before, about, like, maybe people that might shift towards independence later on
Mhm.
because of what's going on now. I just wanted to
Yes.
clear that up before we get into it, just in case people misunderstood
Yes.
it. Like, not everyone in Puerto Rico wants to be a state, right? I
Yes.
think if you ask people statehood, yes or no, like, I think it would go 50-50, maybe a little more for statehood, but it's not like an overwhelming majority, I would
It's
say.
not.
Where it gets really
Exactly.
split up, it's in, like, if the people that say no to statehood, it gets really split up between, like, independence, free association, and staying as we are. So that's how statehood
Yes.
always has the majority. But yeah, but getting to the executive order and all of that. So there were two. There was a letter that was floating around Congress first, I think, and then there was this, like,
Mm.
executive order, which is like a mock-up of an executive
Hmm.
order, which is like how lobbyists do it generally in, like,
Right. It is
Like
a
if you're
lobby.
lobbying for somebody,
Yeah.
like in Congress, you'll write up the law and you just give it to congressmen to sign it, right? Hopefully, like they'll sign it, right? You're pushing for it. So
Yeah.
basically, they did something like that. They prepared the document already. Hey, this is we think this is something that would be good for Puerto Rico, right? And they and so it's been passing around, I don't know, different people in Congress and all of that. And So yeah, so basically it's a document like an executive order granting Puerto Rico independence. So that's
Yeah.
basically what it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
And
yeah.
I remember when I was like hearing about it at first, think I, at least from different people, I had noticed like in Puerto Rico, I at least at first didn't see much of a reaction, because I also feel like most people were sort of like, this doesn't sound even real, doesn't even make sense that that would be happening. But I think from the diaspora, I had heard a lot of people were very concerned, and of course we're talking about the passport and being, what does that mean, and sort of the confusion around like what is going on, because I don't think like um the people who had prepared it had, and I don't know how it works, in terms of whether, like, because they're lobbying, they, they didn't want to put all the cards in, on the table and share it with everyone, and so I completely understand. But I think there was some initial confusion, which led to a sort of defensive response, where a lot of the people who were part of putting that together later had to go and do multiple interviews, because there was a lot of misinformation being shared about it. So I did see that, but I definitely, I personally, I don't know what to make of it. I think like my main thought was, okay, this is something that's being presented to the president and to the congressman as, oh, this is how you can save money in order to further the goal of independence, right? People who really believe that Puerto Rico should be independent through this means. But personally, I also don't know how that would go in a Congress that, at the end of the day, is going to maintain their exploitation of a colony, right? So in my mind, what deal could they make where, for me, numbers wise, the US does make more money, federal funds come in, but the US makes more money from the relationship staying as it is, right? Like, I remember at one point Trump, during like the Hurricane Maria, mentioned about the Jones Act and why they can't cancel the Jones Act to help people who were suffering and needed supplies urgently. So he obviously understands that there is an exploitative relationship, right? That like the US does benefit from having these laws in place and from keeping Puerto Rico as a colony.
Yeah, I the way, like, I don't know how they think in Congress, right? Because I've never been to I've never been to Congress. I don't know any congressmen or anything, but I think there's, for Puerto Ricans, there's three options on the table, basically, right? There's statehood, staying as we are, or independence. There's also free association, but that's also like basically independence with like an agreement with the U.S. So it's still independence, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And For the U.S., statehood is not on the table. It never
Hmm.
has been. One of the reasons why the Commonwealth was established is because before that, Luis Muñoz Marin went to Congress and he wanted to do a plebiscite. And is that the word in English? Plebiscito.
Yeah.
Is that he wanted
I
to have
think.
an election for like the
Yeah.
status, and he wanted, statehood, autonomy, or independence. Congress told them statehood is a no go. It's never gonna happen at that time, right? They said independence, we'll give it to you, but not under these terms. It's gonna be, something else. And autonomy, we can talk about it as well, but it's not gonna be under these terms. It's gonna be something more limited. So Luis Muñoz Marin said, to hell with this. Just I'm gonna go for autonomy, even though it's much more limited than what I would like. It's something, right?
Yeah.
And maybe, this is, I'm sure there's other versions of the story, but the point of that is not so much what Luis Muñoz Marin decided to do or not. The point of that is to say that statehood has never really been on the table. In 1900, when the Four-Acre Act was passed, it was the same thing. They were not going to grant Puerto Rico statehood.
Right.
Today, a big part of the argument is the political argument that they think that if Puerto Rico is a state, it's just going to be like three. I think it's three seats for the Democrats. And
I think so. Yeah.
yeah, they think it's gonna go all Democrat, which might be the case because during the last elections they did this like bullshit symbolic like election
Listen,
for president of the U.S. and
yeah, I remember
Kamala
that.
won by a landslide here. So
I didn't know that
um,
was a thing, by the way. I didn't know that
no,
they
they've
did.
never done that before. That was the
That
first
was
time
the
they did
first
it,
time?
and yeah, a lot
Oh,
of people didn't. I think even people that are pro statehood didn't necessarily vote on it because they're like, I feel like if I was pro statehood, I would be the most offended by it. Like to me,
oh my
it's
God.
just funny.
That's so funny.
But
I'm
like
sorry.
if I was
It
pro
is. It's true.
statehood,
Like,
yeah,
I
so
can't even vote
that's
for
like a spit in
president
the
for
face.
real.
Yeah, it's like
Wow.
you're making fun of me. Like what? Like that's so I didn't get it. But
I mean,
so yeah,
yeah.
they're never gonna make Puerto Rico a state, especially
No.
when they're talking about just getting rid of immigrants, and really when they say immigrants, they mean mostly what Latinos and Muslims, and like
Yeah.
we're not gonna be a state. The other thing that they say
No.
a lot is the language, but there's another thing that's more economic. That's that we would have to pay federal taxes, which we don't pay now. But
Right.
that would also mean that the exemptions on federal taxes that companies get are no longer going to be there. So
Okay.
that means that a lot of the incentives for many companies that are in Puerto Rico are going to go away.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it would be
Exactly.
a huge economic crisis for Puerto Rico if this is what they say, right? What Congress has said. This is not me making an analysis of the economy of Puerto Rico. This is what Congress has said. So
Right.
so what they're saying is the Puerto Rican economy would not be able to sustain statehood. So really, that's not really on the table. Period.
Yeah.
Like
No, and
it's
that's why
staying
I
as we
feel.
are or independence.
Yeah,
And
and that's that. But that's why I feel that they're not going to go. Obviously, not going to go for state. But why I feel like, especially in the diaspora, probably again, no one's done a study. No one has found the data on this. Like, there's no way for me to even. I can't even conceptualize it because, like, I can't even imagine going through that conversation and having this like a survey of the diaspora. Like, what would you prefer? But I do think that at least a lot of the diaspora that follows my page would go for independence. But I would say, like, again, Congress seems to have, knowledge and not just knowledge, but I do remember at one point certain senators getting donations from corporations or companies that benefit from the current structure of Puerto Rico being a colony. So that's why I would say I would find it very like difficult to see any sort of avenue for independence. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe something happens in the next like year in terms of like the movement of this group that has proposed this. Like maybe there is something, maybe they've managed it, but I don't know. I don't know why. I can't imagine why that would work in terms of the sort of financial structure. I don't
I
know.
think I don't know if I'm right about this, but I think probably for some people in the U.S. government, Puerto Rico is more like a pain in the ass than anything
Yeah,
else.
I can see that.
And even you know, even just in terms of image,
Yes.
like just the fact that hey, we granted this 500-year-old colony, we granted them independence, like on the international stage and all that stuff. I think it would look good, and that might be like a minor argument or something that might be like the least that they're concerned with, but that is something that they would gain out of it. But I would think maybe because it is kind of like I think it is kind of a pain. Like I don't know that they have another colony that has as many people as Puerto Rico has. I think Puerto Rico is the biggest. I could be wrong, but I think out of the colonies, Puerto Rico is probably the biggest one.
I
And
think so too.
I think also, like for example, Hurricane Maria comes, like the FEMA funds, which they still haven't like completely given up on all of that. But
Yeah.
it's in terms of like their immigration policy. It complicates a lot of the narratives for them, and I think also just having that threat for them, like they would see that maybe someday the Democrats could manage to make Puerto Rico a state, which I don't think they really will do. But
No.
like that same thing that they have with like the fear that they have that DC might become a state, and that it would just give the other side more power. I would think
Mm,
maybe and I don't know if this is true. I don't even know if they've thought this through that much, but like they might think, hey, if we grant them independence, we don't have to deal with all the other stuff, and the we don't have to deal with the stealing of federal funds that their politicians are doing either. We don't have to. There's a lot
Also,
of stuff that they just don't have to deal with, but they can maybe make some deals where they can steal, stuff that I would imagine the U.S. is interested in, like protecting trade routes, maybe having some bases like military bases here in Puerto Rico, so they could still maybe reap some of the benefits that they have now without having to deal with all the other stuff that they have to deal with now. So I would
yes.
imagine they could sell it as this like big, like like decolonization project that they've gone through, and
The
and
white saviorism is coming
right,
back.
right. So I think they could gain
I see
some
that.
political capital from this, and some I'm not saying that they're interested in it. I think most in the US don't care. I don't know what like
Yeah.
living in the US, what was
Priority
your
wise.
like
Yeah, we're not.
if you
Yeah.
spoke to people about being like being from Puerto Rico, like I feel like I always pretty much get the same questions, but I don't know, like what was your what do you think Americans' perception of Puerto Rico is? Just like in general, like general
It's
public.
I guess I could go into like a lot of different perspectives that I've seen, but I think for the most part, I've seen everything from, oh, Puerto Rico should be independent, to, oh, but Puerto Rico should be part of the American family. Puerto Rico should be part of the United States. Like we should all get along. Like there's a mixture, but I think Americans for the most part are not really thinking about Puerto Rico. Most of them
Right.
don't even know, and don't they're like, "Wait, I can go with a passport? No way. Oh, wait, US dollar? What? This is amazing." So, they really just look at us in the very exploitative way that most white people look at, like minorities, like, "Oh, what can you do for me? Oh, I can go there and it's a paradise. It's a place I can go to." Like they don't really, and I'm not talking about like my close friends that are white that are from over there. They're that I even had one of them ask me like, what's a good book that I can read, and I suggested War Against All Puerto Ricans. I suggested some other books on Pedro Albizu Campos, and they were like, yeah, I'm gonna go buy these and I'm gonna read. So very rarely do I find an American that actually like tries to learn the history of Puerto Rico, and it's like its relationship, the exploitation that has happened, many things that have gone on here. But for the most part, the majority, and maybe that's changing with like the diaspora being more vocal, but for the most part, they just see it as a, like, what is this place? Like, how is this even connected? And so just the very fact that they don't know about the passport, the dollar, they don't know any of that. I really, I really doubt that we'll see much of that. I mean, I've seen certain night, what is it called? The nightly, oh my God, the what's his name, the Daily Show. Like I've
Mm.
seen
Yeah.
reports on Puerto Rico, so there's been, especially on the left, like some reporting in terms of this is what's going on, this is what you should know about Puerto Rico, you should know that it's part of the US. So
Yeah.
but a lot of it is like very cringy, because I'm like, oh, I don't want to hear them talking about us from that perspective. You mentioned this too, like sometimes when you hear that, it's like, oh, they
Yeah.
sort of get it right, but it's just always like from a very weird perspective, and like
Yeah.
the white gaze, I guess I could say.
Yeah. I mean, I appreciate the sometimes like I appreciate the attempt just to like, get the information out there, like, hey, this is what Puerto Rico is a little bit, but
Yeah.
I don't know exactly how to explain it, but it does feel a little off sometimes. And it's not like hating on it or anything. It's just it doesn't and some of it, I'm not even talking like in terms of like political views or any kind of bias, or it's just something
No.
about the way that it's told. I don't know what it is, but like I feel like a lot of what I get from people that know something about Puerto Rico is that they assume Puerto Ricans, like everyone here, is just dying to be a state, and
Yeah.
like which is weird to me a little
Yeah.
bit, that they would just that like I find some people are shocked to find that not everyone wants to be a state,
Yeah.
and so
Yeah. Yeah.
and yeah,
But I'm sitting
most
here
people
like,
don't know.
yep, I've heard and seen it all. And
Yeah.
I guess like the reason. the reason you might be like, oh, how come they have this reaction, is because when you are when you're born and raised over there, and you see from the from the point where I think I started to understand it was really when I was in college, that you start to understand there's something kind of off here in the US. There's something kind of weird around the way we talk about minorities, or the way that we talk about people that are not like them. And so for me, it was really important, as I started to like decolonize my history in my mind in terms of understanding things, is that they will always see themselves as the white saviors. They will always see themselves as like the, oh, but we're here to help. We're here to bring democracy, even though they're quite literally taking that there's no democracy under their under this system that they have us in. So
Yeah.
I think that's the most ironic thing. Like, while we are representing democracy, we are taking it away from you guys. That
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
wild.
Yeah, no, it's there's like this big, like, being a colony is sort of like an eternal catch 22. They'll tell you, like, democracy, but in the end Congress has the last say on everything, and any federal laws apply here without our say in it. Promesa, which they'll say, like, oh, but if a state goes bankrupt, they also get like a fiscal board that's not elected. But it's like, no, but the people that name it were elected. In our case, the people that named ours were not elected by us. So, like, we had absolutely no say in who named that board. So there's some differences, but also, like, the idea that, oh, you have to be doing well in order to become a state, or you have to be doing well in order to be independent. But then you can't be doing well unless you're independent, or unless you're a state. So, like, it's an argument that never solves itself. And within
Yeah.
those two, there's really only one. Within all the options, there's only one that we can do on our own, which is independence, right? In theory, you could just, like, you could force their hand, like, you can just,
Mm.
one way or another. I'm not advocating for like a revolution or anything, but in
No,
theory,
no,
that's
no. I
always
know what
right.
you,
But
but I know
that's
what
always
you
on the
mean.
table. You can't do that for statehood.
Right.
You can't do a revolution and become a state, right? So, like, and again,
Right.
I'm not advocating for revolution. I'm not like that's not who I am. But, like, in theory, that's always. So that's the only one that we could do on our own. It's independence. It's not anything else. So,
Right.
but if we get into more, like, some of the effects that this colonialism has in Puerto Rico, recently. Not,
Yes.
I'm skipping over all the other horrible stuff that has happened before. Some of the worst, we're skipping over the worst stuff, not on purpose, but just because I wanted to talk about what's going on now.
Yeah, the current
It's
news.
not because
Yeah.
I want to ignore anything else. But so in the 90s, you were mentioning about when, I don't know if this had anything to do with when you moved to the States when you were two, but, like, in the 90s, they eliminated the Act 936, which basically was incentive for manufacturing plants to come to Puerto Rico,
I
right? For,
remember
like,
that one.
factories. And
Pharmaceutical
what?
or no? Was
What?
it pharmaceuticals as well or no?
Mostly pharmaceuticals, but no,
Okay.
but not, maybe not mostly there were pharmaceuticals, but there were a lot of other companies as well. And when they eliminated that, a lot of, here the politicians thought, and that has all this stuff to do as well with, like, wanting to become a state, because with 936 we could not become a state. And also they
Mm.
wanted to dismantle the Popular project, because that was a law passed under the Popular government, and that also had to do with Project Bootstrap from before. But the idea was, like, the PNP wanted to just dismantle everything that the Popular Party did. They wanted Puerto Rico, like, they figured we can't convince people to want to be a state if they're doing well now, right? So, but also those were incentives that would not be available if we were a state. So we could not be a state with that law. So they eliminated it. There was no plan B. Those factories left. And that has had a lot to do with, like, we've been in a recession for I don't know how long, because they never came up with a solution for it. And later on, you have I think it was Fortuño, maybe it was Garcia Padilla, but I think either way it started with Fortuño, Act 22. Um,
Mm.
Act 20 and Act 22. It's sort of a similar Act 22 specifically. It's a similar logic in the sense that it's tax incentives that would not be available if we became a state. You can't become a state with Act 22 in place, right? So there are these tax incentives if you like own a property, if you invest in Bitcoin or I think stocks, things like that, but
I wanted to
only
mention that.
if you didn't live in Puerto Rico for like between 2006 and 2012.
Yeah, I wanted to mention that piece about like the Bitcoin and cryptocurrency and all that because, just from the perspective of the diaspora, the first time I had heard about Act 2022 and everything that it had to do with was news articles in the Times and different things talking about, oh, Americans can move to Puerto Rico and it's a tax haven for you. So I'm really glad you mentioned that because at that point in time, I think a lot of Puerto Ricans in the diaspora weren't quite like aware of it unless they came back and forth and got their news from here. So for me, it was kind of like that impact, but I think it was already the law had been in effect for a while when we started to hear about it because, like you said, wealthy Americans started moving here and getting, those taxes incentives, basically
Yeah.
not paying. I'm laughing because it's just this. It is absurd. Like they come here and they just don't have to pay any taxes at all.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And it's an incentive to like invest in property, for example. Property prices in Puerto Rico are crazy.
Yes,
And the
gotten
like
so
median
bad.
like the average income for a Puerto Rican I think is like 20 or 25,000 a year. It's much lower than the US.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's less than half of what the average income is in the US. So most Puerto Ricans cannot afford to buy a house. And the I don't think it's only people coming here with Act 22. I think also remote work has something to do with it because I know some of this is also happening in the States where small towns are getting taken over by people that make very large sums of
México también.
money. And
Yo creo que
yeah,
Mexico City, sí,
yeah,
Mexico City is
Spain,
also
yeah, a lot of different places
so
it's
many
happening.
places are being impacted. Yeah.
Yeah, but here in Puerto Rico, there's actually an incentive for like billionaires to come to Puerto Rico and do it. Like, and the government is. It's not that they're not doing anything. Like they're actually facilitating it, right? And so this. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh no, I just had a quick question about sort of like how was it here when you started to see these incentives that always seem to benefit outsiders, outside companies, outside billionaires, individuals? What was there not enough discussion, at least like, I've heard that the media locally is very biased, but have there not been enough discussions on like why isn't the government here doing more for the people? Like helping with small business loans, helping with getting people, like you said, so that their pay could be higher. So
Well,
I
because they
guess that's
say they
where
do. They say they're doing it, and also like they'll be like, this is economic
say,
development, right? This broad term that means nothing because
oh my god.
these incentives have not created jobs. I think I don't know the number now, but at one point there were like 5,000 people with Act 22 here, and they were claiming that Act 22 had created 5,000 jobs. So it
How
was like
many
one to
jobs?
one, right? And also, but that number was not. Apparently, that number was. They were saying it's not necessarily precise because we're counting Act 20, which Act 20 is available to Puerto Ricans. It's Act 22 that's not. But
Mm,
and Act 20 does actually. It's a different thing. Like people like the criticisms for Act 20 that I see are more like it should be improved, but
okay.
not. But it's not like Act 20. Like Act 22. It's a different thing. And so they were saying a lot of these jobs, maybe all of them, might actually have to do with Act 20, because there are a lot of people that have Act 22 also have Act 20. So they're mixing
Mm,
those. So, anyways, the point is, it
yeah.
hasn't really done much. These are people that are getting tax incentives when Puerto Rico has like this large debt, right? Where like we actually need people to pay higher taxes in order to pay down that debt. So like
Yeah.
it doesn't. It's all
That's
contradictory.
what's
But like
crazy. Yeah.
for me at least, I didn't really know about Act 22 until like I don't know, like 4 years ago or something like that. I didn't know about this when it was passed, but
Mm, interesting.
so anyway, but I was trying to get to like um Esencia and
Right.
what's going on
Project
in
Esencia.
Rincon and all these other. So
Yeah.
there's been because I don't know if people are listening to this and they've heard me talk so much. I was trying to this whole time. This was one of the main reasons why I wanted
Yeah, we're coming
Debbie to
together to
come
try
here
to talk
because
about these recent events and
yeah.
like these
It was one of the
yeah,
main
these
reasons that
news.
I wanted you to come here because I've seen you very active covering these issues. And
Yeah.
um, so there's this like upscale, let's say like gated communities in Puerto Rico, right? Like there's
Yes,
Dorado
that's very
Beach.
common here. Right.
There's there's a lot of gated communities, but there's some that are very upscale. But there's some in particular that are like close to the beach and all of that. Dorado Beach is I don't know, is that what it's called? Is it Dorado?
So
Is it something else? It's
I'm pretty sure
I don't
it's
know.
Dorado Beach. Yeah. Mhm.
Wherever, like, is that where Logan Paul lives and all of that?
Yes,
Like
I
it's like
think
this
I'm
very
pretty
very
sure.
upscale, like
I
millionaires
try not to go
mansions,
there.
things like that. So
Yeah.
and there's been a lot of conflicts in Puerto Rico, partly because of, and I mean controversies. I should say controversies. Really, it's the word that I was looking for. So with property prices going really high, inflation and all of that, but also with constructions very close to the beach, partly because of access, because beaches should be public, and also because building very close to the beach, one, it's illegal,
Mhm.
and two, it
Why is it
actually causes
illegal
a lot
though?
of
That's
damage, like erosion and things like that.
Yeah, but this is the thing that I think was so fascinating. Like, it's so fascinating that there's certain laws here that so obviously like should be everywhere, right? Like that certain so, everyone should have access to the beach. The beaches belong to the people, and that's something that many in the diaspora as well have heard this term, like las playas son del pueblo, and so that's been going on for a while now. But I think that, like you said, in Dorado Beach and these certain areas, they have made these resorts, they have made these hotels, they have made these residences that are closed off with no access. And people like Bianca have covered these things, have done videos where they literally try to walk and try to get there, but there's no access. Or they make it very difficult, where you have to go through an entry point. And so Esencia is that on steroids. That's what I would say. Like that's the
Yeah.
most simple way to say it. It's like what has been happening in Dorado, but it's even worse.
It's something much bigger than any other development like it in Puerto Rico. It's bigger than there used to be a military base here called Roosevelt Roads,
Yeah.
in the east of Puerto Rico, which was huge, massive. This is bigger than that.
Mm,
That place had that I had Esteban and Guarionex and Titus from Plan de Contingencia on my podcast, and they were explaining this to me.
yeah.
Um, like Roosevelt Roads had an airport, it had like a dry dock to build ships. It was crazy. There was like, and it's abandoned now, but it was a huge plot of land. This is even bigger than that. And so basically, they're gonna build this in what's a dry forest to the southwest of Puerto Rico, one of the that has some of the best beaches in Puerto Rico,
Yep.
Cabo Rojo.
Yep.
They're making this very close to the beach. It's a town that already has issues with the water supply because it's there's no rivers in Cabo Rojo, and basically the water goes out all the time. And just they were telling me like just the golf courses alone are gonna consume more water than just the communities to the south of Cabo Rojo together. And also the contaminants like the pesticides and the chemicals that they're gonna use on those golf courses. It's so close
It's
to the
going
beach
to
and it's
ruin.
uphill. It's
Yep.
all gonna run down into the ocean, so it's gonna contaminate all the beaches in Cabo Rojo, which again has some of the best beaches in Puerto Rico. So a lot of this stuff, they say it's for tourism, for economic development through tourism, but it's actually destroying the things that are attractive for tourism. So I don't know how much have you seen about Essencia? Like what's your take on it?
Yeah, so I think I went to the public hearings because I've been following the groups, the organizations that are there on the ground. And I also saw the documentary, part one of the documentary. I still have to finish part two that came out recently
That's
from Gabo
Gabriel Ramos. Yeah,
Gabriel Ramos. Yeah. Another person you should interview if you get a chance, because
yeah.
he knows it inside and out. So I've been getting a lot of my information from the people who live there or from there, and from these public hearings, like just seeing how a lot of the information in the Proyecto Esencia, which has been proposed by these outside investors that are coming from London, just none of it actually is based on any factual evidence. So a lot of the people that showed up at the public hearings were geologists, archaeologists, because of course some of the indigenous artifacts and caves that are there would be affected. They're
Yeah.
planning to like remove indigenous sites
But
and
there's like 140 archaeological sites there, which is the most
exactly.
out of any place in Puerto Rico. And
Yeah, they picked the
yeah. They're probably gonna
worst
destroy them.
spots.
They're probably not gonna remove them. They're probably just gonna build on top of
They're
it and
just
just
gonna
destroy it.
go
Yeah.
over them. Yeah, and one of the organizers did say that she's talked to construction workers that have worked in other places where they've literally called her, you know, in distress because they've said, "Oh, we had to pave over this archaeological site because I was too afraid to say anything." And I remember when I heard that, and I believe it was on Plan de Contingencia. It's just it's frustrating, but it's also it's so much a part of why we need to keep having these conversations because again, they won't care about indigenous artifacts. They won't care about the culture here. One of the women in the one of the organizers says, "Oh, Proyecto Esencia, they're going to build basically a city within a city because they don't want local people in there. They're not going to make it accessible to them to go to the beach.
Yeah, this
They,
is for
you know,
millionaires and billionaires what they're
yeah,
building there. Yeah.
yeah. So they're going to look down on any of the locals there and say, "Oh, of course not." There's a definitely an environmental impact too. So I think that's something that you're seeing a lot more. At least like for those of us that are over here, we're seeing a lot more activism around the environment and people stopping machines that are going to tear down trees and areas that have been there for many generations that have been like taken care of by the community. So I think Proyecto Esencia for me is obviously it's like it's a project that is going to destroy the local economy. It's going to destroy the environment. In Cabo Rojo, it's like you said, it's going to poison. You know, there's going to be toxins in the water. You know, it's a beautiful beach. I can't imagine. I've been going there for a while now. I can't imagine seeing that beach destroyed where you can't even go in the water because it's poisoned. And so I think for me, I had that moment of clarity where I said, like, yes, I'm not from there, but if I can do anything to help the community to raise their voice, to amplify what they're doing, I'm going to do it. You know, like I just felt this, no sé cómo decirlo. It's just like this, like, I just couldn't sit still and like watch it happen. I felt like I needed to at least try something to try to raise awareness around it. And I think, you know, as much as we can in the diaspora, like sharing it, they have they have plans and strategies that they're, you know, just being aware of ways that we can help in the future. Because after these public hearings, I think there's one more left. I don't know what the next step is because even the mayor has continuously supported the project, even though the community has come out and been very clear they don't want it. His concern is, like you said, it's always about the progress, it's the development, it's going to help tourism, it's going to help the community, but it really is just more about putting money in his pocket. I don't know exactly how he stands to benefit from it financially, but many people have said, why would he support a project that the community has, many people have said they don't want it. So in my head, it's like there's a discrepancy, there's it's a red flag that the mayor of the town is not listening to the people. ¿Me entiende? Como que there's something
Yeah.
there that's not está chocando.
There's I would imagine, at least at the very least, just there's like the, maybe this has something to do with it, like the property taxes. At least part of it goes to the municipalities. So
Exactly.
I don't know if that has something to do with it,
I'm
or if
sure.
it's you know, I think that's the generous version of it. I don't know if they're even getting exemptions from that. Maybe they are, and that's not even it. But I
That
don't know.
was
But
actually
yeah,
I do want to say that in one of the comments in the public hearing, someone did say, you know, they're making all these plans, and yet some of this supposedly will end up falling on the taxpayer. La persona, the people who are from Cabo Rojo. So that's another aspect of it that was a little bit frightening. Like the idea of like, not only are they coming here, they're getting rid of all of this, they're taking resources like the water access as well. So if they're supposed to build here for like, let's say 5 years to 10 years, that a lot of the water that they're going to be taking to use to construct and then later to put in the on their golf courses that no one else is able to access, it's going to take away from the community because they don't have the plumbing system to sustain that.
yeah.
So again, all goes back to it's going to be just horrible for the
Yeah.
community.
And it's illegal. We should say, like, what they're doing is illegal because it's on a protected land that they can't build this
Exactly.
kind of stuff on. And also, they lied about certain things, that like they were counting the golf courses as like green areas, like if it's gonna be
Oh,
like like it's gonna be a forest, like the golf courses are gonna be
I
forests. So
remember that.
yeah.
I remember where they were like, "Oh yeah, see, we're only going to be constructing on these areas," because they were trying to count the golf courses as the part of the natural
Yeah,
preserve.
yeah,
And
yeah,
it's like I think that also just highlights how there's again this discrepancy between the locals wanting to protect their natural preserves and nature in general, and like, the fact that this is a, to me, I kept thinking about like an indigenous struggle, because like we've always wanted to maintain and help and protect the environment, while they want to come in and just get rid of everything and poison the water, poison the ecosystem. And there's endangered species. That's another thing. That's what I was gonna say. I got the shirt of the bird, that they were, and that's another thing. I think that's why these organizations and the fact that we're sharing what they're doing is so important, because there's so much I didn't even know if it wasn't for those organizations like talking about it.
yeah,
So
yeah. There's also like and this is there's other organizations. I don't know if how involved these ones are, but like a few years ago, with there was another development in Rincon that wanted to build a pool very close to the beach, and there was this Campamento
I
Carey
think I heard
that
about,
appeared,
yeah,
and Eliezer Molina, who he
yes,
had run in the elections before for governor, but he really became a more prominent figure out of that, and he's been a very polarizing figure, I would say, in a way, um, and but even the people that don't like him, like I see so many people that can't stand him, but even they go like, but what he's saying is true. I see
yeah.
people that say that all the time, like, I don't like him, I don't like the way he speaks, but what he's saying is true. And so
Pero
he
dice
also
la
made
verdad,
history
exactly. He
in these
tells the
elections.
truth.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I
and
love
and
that.
he yeah, yeah, and he made history in these elections because he was the first time someone won. I think someone won for mayor once like this, but he was the first one that ever won on a write-in ballot
Yeah,
for senator.
yeah.
First time in the history of Puerto Rico. So now, Proyecto Esencia, I don't know to what extent Campamento Carey and the others have been involved. I have no idea, but it's really been like other projects, more like, in Esencia, that have been doing that. But I say that just in the sense that because of those movements, which are not the first time that happened in Puerto Rico's history, it's not.
No,
But I
been
think that
plenty.
really
Yeah,
brought it to national attention on recent years. And it's been
yeah.
more on people's minds in recent years because of those protests. And there's a lot of other developments going on around the coast in Puerto Rico. They're illegal. They should not be happening. They're still happening. The one in Rincon that I mentioned with the pool, it was I forgot the name of the place, but they managed to stop that one. But that was years of
See,
protests,
it was years
and
of
they
being
took they
there,
took
being
hits
active.
from the cops, and it was not easy. Like that, they really, Eliezer Molina, his house was like they tried to murder him and his family just during in 2024. I
Hmm.
think almost a year ago now, they tried to, like, they shot up his house.
Yeah,
Nothing
I
happened.
remember
They
seeing the
didn't they
news.
didn't they didn't arrest anybody. They didn't. So this is intense stuff. People have gotten shot. In
Yeah,
Aguadilla, somebody got shot during a protest. Again, nothing happened to the guy that shot him. So
and I'm so
so
glad you said
yeah,
that, because I think for a lot of people, it's like, oh, people show up and they try to stop, but it has gotten violent, like you said, and it's also. I wanted to mention the perspective of the people who have been arrested at some of these protests, who are within their rights. Like, they're not doing anything illegal by protesting and raising their voice.
peaceful
Like
protests, really.
they're
Like, they always
peacefully
portray them as
protesting.
they're not, but like they're peaceful protests. Yeah.
They're doing everything like within the law. But when they've gotten arrested, there's also the perspective of how they are persecuted financially, right? Because now they have to pay all these legal fees, they have to go through all these steps. And so I think, I can't remember, I'd have to find this information, but I do know that people have been affected deeply by, being arrested. And that's another method that they use
Yeah.
to try to prevent people. Pero that part about Eliezer Molina's house, I do remember hearing about that, but I thought that, again, we always say this is like you would think that the police and the, it's like, you know, in a place that's all about law and order, that they would find the people responsible. But I mean, I have my theories on who, you know, who might have been involved. I'm not going to say that, but I do think that there's very clearly what, you know, people who benefit from, you know,
Why would you
certain
be
people.
willing? Why would you be willing to kill over this, right? Like
Exactly.
it's. Why would
It's
you
all
be willing
money.
to go to those lands to protect this kind of stuff? Also,
Exactly.
why do you need to build so close to the coast? Why do you need docks close to the coast?
You know, it's so funny
Because
because
something that I've heard
yeah,
rumors is
yeah.
that a lot of the drugs that come to Puerto Rico come in through Palmas del Mar.
Yep. It is.
So
It's so interesting. It's like it's all tied to money and it's tied to illegal activities.
allegedly,
I 100%. Yeah, allegedly, but like, I
allegedly.
mean, everything fits. Like
I don't think
it's
I
like
need to say it, but it's just funny to me to say it every once in a while.
it's funny because it's so crazy. It's wild. But yeah,
Yeah,
but building along the coast. I mean, I also think that like whenever I think of wealthy, you know, people, it's always like they don't care what they do to the environment or anything around them or people around them. They want, you know, they want their ocean, and they just, like you said, it also could be very much tied to like illegal activities as well.
I
They
think there's
think
a
they're
giant money laundering thing going on here. I think that's what it is. Like it's all sort of tied together. I don't want this to sound like a conspiracy theory, but
not at
I'm
all.
sure it's not all connected all the time, but like different interests that sort of coincide in certain ways. And I think it appears to me that Proyecto Esencia is more of a large scale money laundering operation. Like they make massive projects like this that end up getting abandoned, or like, they finish them, but nobody, like, I don't know how many people live in Paseo Caribe. But
Mm.
it looks empty,
¿Dónde? Where is Paseo Caribe again?
like
It
by
sounds
the Caribe
familiar.
Hilton, like going into San Juan, coming from Condado or Miramar when you
Yep.
cross the bridge to like that first building that you see there. So that was also, there were big protests when they tried to build that too. It's also illegal, close to the coast. So
Crazy.
so they got away with it there. A lot of these stuff like Proyecto Esencia, it's probably gonna be years of fighting this.
It's gonna
I
be,
would
oh
assume
yeah,
this is gonna be a long
100%.
fight. And it's a very uphill battle. But I think, for me, the stuff that matters to me the most about this, it's more like the environmental issues and the impact that it could have on the community and all of that, and just even the idea like of just building like just a massive like castle for like the rich. But there's, if you want to be more pragmatic about it, just the impact that it's going to have on the beaches, that's going to have an impact on tourism negatively, because people
Exactly.
are
It
not
will
going to
be
want to,
negative.
they're not going to be able to go to those beaches. Why would people go to Cabo Rojo if it's just a toxic wasteland, right? Like if there's no
Exactly.
water,
Oh my
why
gosh.
would people want to go stay there unless you go to Proyecto Esencia? Like what are the jobs for people? It's they're talking about economic development, but like, like construction workers, that's a temporary job. And
Hmm.
what's else, like, to be just, Puerto Rico has a very large resource of professionals that went to college, that can't find jobs in the fields that they studied at, right? But you
Exactly.
have that wealth, that resource there, and yet their plan for economic development is to have all those professionals working like in, like, just in service, right, in hotels and in restaurants and things like that's their plan of economic development. That's basically what it is now for most people. So like, I don't see, you can't talk about economic development without presenting a plan. Like,
Exactly.
and
And no,
they're not
and
presenting us a plan.
that's been part of the public hearings as well, where they're questioning how come there's no information or data about where these supposed jobs are going to be and in what. And if it's any indication, right, like it highlights so well that they see us more in the service of them than they see us as people who can manage and do. And so at the end of the day, you know, it's a project that people will have to fight for many years. But I also think that now that the diaspora is becoming more engaged, this is again a big reason why with my podcast I want to continue, is that people want to know how they can be involved. You know, I've heard people say next time I'm in Puerto Rico, I can come and I can go to a protest. And so it's really
Yeah.
Getting people activated and knowing that even if it's for a short time, even if it's in this way or that way, that there's no there's no set way that you can become an activist or that you can become um, engaged in the issue. So that's why I'm really glad that we had this time to talk about this, because I think it is going to take years, but it's important for people to feel and understand that, like, as a community, we can fight it, because there are more of us, and you could see it in the public hearings. I was so happy. I walked in and it was just packed, a lot of angry faces, but
Yeah.
people are determined. They're determined to stick it out, and all of the commentary that was coming out of it is like, directed to the investors, because there were some of
Yeah.
the representatives were there, and it was just like, oh, be ready for the fight of your life, because we're not going to allow this to pass. So
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
is something that gave me a lot of hope too.
Yeah. So there's one more thing that there's so much stuff that I wanted to cover, and
I
clearly we
know.
went over, but there's one more stuff that I wanted to cover. But before I get to that, one other thing, and I'm just gonna mention this briefly, and then we'll get to the other thing. But
Yeah.
because of the archaeological sites, something else that's going on in Puerto Rico is that Tomás Rivera Schatz, one of the prominent politicians in Puerto Rico, is the head of the Senate right now. He proposed a law to eliminate the Institute of Puerto Rican Culture. Because of the Institute of Puerto Rican Culture is the reason why Old San Juan still exists today. If it wasn't
Mhm.
for that, that probably would have been demolished in the 50s or the 60s to make way for sky rises and things like that. So they, among a lot of other things, they're the ones that are in charge with protecting, like historical documents, paintings by Jose Campeche, Francisco Yer, like you name it, all the important Puerto Rican artists, the music, the reason why Plena Bomba still exists, the reason why Bad Bunny was able to make his album is
It's
because
yeah.
Ricardo Alegría and the Institute of Puerto Rican Culture and all the people that were working there preserved all that stuff so that today we still know about it. And the Cuatro, all of that. They also in charge of preserving like archaeological artifacts, archaeological sites, and they regulate, you know, like for example, if you want to remodel a house in Old San Juan, there's rules. The
Exactly.
Institute of Puerto Rican Culture, at least in theory, on paper, it's supposed to be, supervising that kind of stuff, regulating that kind of stuff, and that would also apply to a project like Esencia, where like they would, there are limits because ICPX, the Institute of Puerto Rican Culture exists. That they have to be a lot of studies made on these archaeological sites before they can build anything on it, and that's a process that takes years. And so it appears, one of the people involved in this project, at least one of them, is actually a member of the board of directors of the Institute of Puerto Rican Culture. So it
Mm.
appears that at least one of the reasons, if not the reason, why they want to get rid of the Institute of Puerto Rican Culture is so they can make Proyecto Esencia quicker, right? So,
Mm. They have
with
less
the
barriers to get things
right,
passed.
right,
Yeah.
exactly. So that's
Oh, that's
one.
really
That's one
interesting.
theory.
I didn't know about that connection. Maybe
Yeah,
I had
yeah,
missed
yeah,
it.
yeah,
I mean, I'm sure it's been shared before, but that's a
yeah,
really interesting connection when you think about the fact that, archaeological sites that need to be monitored and supervised, and all the permits
yeah.
in order to study and make sure you remove it if there's going to be construction. Yeah, and that of course could take years. You no longer
Yeah,
need to do that. Yeah, you fast track
exactly.
your way into. So very this is actually really interesting, because it's now my mind is like connecting all the dots, where it's like, oh, of course Rivera Schatz is involved in something that's going to end up
Yeah,
creating
of course, it's
a
involved in something shady.
it's super shady. Yeah, super
You guys
shady, of
should look
course.
up Tomas Rivera Schatz if you've never heard of. I mean, I'm sure you have, but if you
Just
haven't, like,
looking at
look
him,
him
I'm
up.
like,
Look him up.
this guy
Look up
needs
his
to be.
mugshot. Look up his mugshot.
Oh
Yeah.
my god, he looks like the
so
villain of every story that I've ever
so and
seen.
there's
It's
something
crazy.
similar, although they haven't proposed eliminating the Department of Natural Resources. But and this is also because I want to get to Rincon. That's the last
Yes.
thing that I wanted to
Yeah,
cover.
yeah.
But
Of course.
you know, the governor, Jennifer Gonzalez, her in-laws have now. It appears it's two houses. We thought it was one. They
It
have a house in La Parguera.
it keeps
La
growing.
Parguera
Yeah.
is this area, another like popular destination. It has these mangroves with like beaches. So you take a boat and you go there. The water's really shallow. It's clear. You can. It's a really beautiful place, right? There's also these houses that they built along one of the mangrove channels. They're all illegal. They're not supposed to be there.
They're
but
all
they are.
illegal. Yes.
And so there was this compromise made. You couldn't, I don't want to get into all this, you couldn't like renovate and things. There were limits to it. So turns out that Jennifer Gonzalez in-laws broke the law, right? Allegedly, let's say. And they so there's been protests over that too, and they named this new natural resources director, and he passed something that basically made it like legal. Jennifer Gonzalez named this guy, and then he sort of had to like pull back because the Eliezer Molina was
Yeah.
like,
So the Senate,
so
okay.
yeah,
I would love
yeah,
to just sorry chime in. Is just that it was really interesting because when I first heard about this, I was like, oh, they're talking about La Parguera, which is a place that I've loved going to because I remember going on a boat ride where they showed you a little bit of like the bioluminescence. So I didn't get to dive in the water. But I started to learn a little bit about La Parguera's history because I started to hear from people who were protesting what was going on, and then Eliezer Molina coming out because there was I don't know what came first, but there was a proposal to change the laws around like what is supposed to be like the zone like
yeah.
the
Johnny Mendez tried doing it,
yes,
but the stuff with La Parguera, the protest started actually
right,
like last year or the year before.
year before
Before,
where people
so
were saying
now, yeah,
yeah.
but now people know about this, and so now they want to pass a law to make it easier. I think Johnny Mendez passed a law to change the yeah, what you're mentioning
So
about the
after the fact, yeah. So when I first heard about La Parguera, right, I'd heard about these protests, about these illegal houses that were initially they were fishermen that were living there in the very beginning, and then over like the years, I believe it was
they
the
had some perm they
60s.
had permits, but there were only
They
a
had
few of
permits
them.
because they
Yeah,
were
yeah, yeah,
fishing. Yeah, it was part of the
yeah.
they were conscious of the ecosystem. They were conscious of so then over time, wealthy people started building there illegally and building these big houses. And then now I didn't even realize also creating some of them to be Airbnbs. And so none of them pay any kind of property tax or any kind of
No, they pay I think they pay property
do they?
tax. Yeah, I think
Because
that's the
I
reason why.
remember
Yeah,
someone saying,
yeah,
"Oh, we're gonna change."
that's why the mayor is defending them.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
so they started paying property taxes on properties that were built illegally, and then right, and then there was a case against the governor's the in-laws that were there,
yeah.
and I remember reading about that in the sense that they were like, oh, they created this case where they had to pay fines. Is that what it was? They had to pay some fines. And so the
Uh,
new director that was
mhm.
named by the governor is like, oh, we're going to dismiss that case, which is such an obvious like
Yeah,
conflict of
yeah.
interest there.
I think they were.
Um,
I don't remember if they had. I can't remember if they had gotten like actually if they actually got the fine or if it was still in the process. I can't remember that part of it. But yeah, but either way, it was getting investigated. And there were trials. It was. Maybe they had already got. I really I can't remember though. But yeah, but either way, yeah. This guy, he said, let's dismiss it.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
And I was like, okay, where where are we at? This is
yeah.
this is a little bit of why I feel like,
And it was like the
again,
day he came in, and I think he wasn't still like officially named. It was like the
yeah,
first day, his first day.
his first
Yeah, he
action
came in.
was
That was
to
the first thing he did.
dismiss
Yeah,
a case against the
it was
governor's
so
in-laws.
transparent. It was
Wow.
so transparent. Yeah,
Didn't even wait till the ink was dry. But what
yeah,
I was gonna say is that like at least these conversations are highlighting again the kind of corruption and the kind of things that they're doing illegally. And I get again when I started like reporting it on my page and sharing about it, like it was really important to not just amplify what people were saying, but also make it accessible for people to understand because
yeah.
like you said, there's so many things happening, but it's how do we give this information in a
Yeah.
simple way.
And there's so much
And
background that you need to start that it's too much. Yeah,
it's
yeah,
sometimes too much, but I think it's very clear, like seeing
yeah,
wealthy people squatting on public, areas that are supposed to be protected. Their waste is going into the area,
yeah,
the ecosystem. They
yeah,
don't even have a proper plumbing, which is
yeah.
disgusting. Like they're just
That's
going
happening
in
in
there.
Condado too, by the way, in Ocean
Yeah,
Park. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
That's why
So
I don't go in the water. I don't
yeah,
go in
yeah.
the water.
Don't go.
That's disgusting.
So
All of the
so
sewage, by the way, everybody, all the sewage in Condado and Ocean Park, don't go there. If you're gonna go anywhere,
yeah, yeah.
obviously go to other beaches
Or
away
just
from
sit in the
Área Metro.
sand, but don't get in the. Um,
Oof.
so
Yeah.
um, so the last thing that I wanted to get to, and this is the one that I'm the least informed about, because it happened pretty recently, and
Yeah.
I haven't been able to keep up with all of it. But it's the stuff that's going on in Rincon. So I know very broadly about what's going on, but I was wondering if you could talk about that
Yeah. So I
with the
started
bike path. Yeah.
I started hearing about this, I want to say last week, when people started to share videos about protests that were going on in Rincon. And of course, my perception of Rincon is like what people have said, which is like, oh, a lot of white people, a lot of gringos have moved there. And so it's become very gentrified and it's become, and so I was kind of shocked because I didn't know where, where to get the information. And then I started seeing organizations that have been there for a long time, that have been protecting the area, that have been maintaining se llama Bosque Armonía,
Mhm.
and then Rescate Camino al Faro. And so there's a couple groups that we'll share, but like I think that the most important thing is that they were all very coordinated in the way that they communicated within their community to say, we have to show up today because they don't even have permits and they're trying to come in here and tear down these trees. Some of them 30-year-old trees, 50-year-old trees. I remember someone saying
But they
like
planted them, right? Some of
that
them they
they
were
had
planted by them.
planted
Yeah.
30
Yeah.
years ago. Yeah. And so they were saying like, how are these machines coming in here without any permits? That the mayor hasn't come out and done anything about this. So we as a community are gonna come and do something. And so I was following a few pages. I did an Instagram live with one of them recently, but the organizers are basically saying we're going to stay here and we're going to stop them. We're going to stand in front of the machines. We're going to stand, hold hands around the trees to avoid them trying to cut the trees down. They legit just put themselves in front of all of that. They're very well prepared. That's one of the things that I appreciated, that they, had everyone, it sounds like they had, music, they had water, they had the essentials to stay there and actually prevent the machines. And then after the machines left, they continued to stay there because every single day they're showing up to the beach just in case. And so at one point they tried to bring like a tree trimmer or a tree cutter to try to take and so, that's been one of the things that I feel like sometimes you can feel helpless. Like I wish I could do more, but I think in sharing what they're doing and being a part of like disseminating the information. But basically, yeah, what they wanted. So going back to like why is this happening is that the mayor had approved some sort of plan to create a mural, and then also a bike path. And the community for a long time had said, we don't want a bike path here. We would love for people to have a they do want a sustainable project that can create a bike path. They're not against bike paths.
But not there.
Well,
That's not a
they
good place to build it.
but not
Yeah.
right there. And then they started sharing also other projects that have happened in other parts of the island where the bike paths have been crumbling. So it's
Just
almost like why are you
if you ever come to Puerto Rico, and you're not from Puerto Rico and you come here, just go to Old San Juan and
yes,
drive to if you're driving from like El Hamburger, from El Escambron, going to San Juan, you're gonna
Escambron.
see there's a
Oh,
path there, right? Where people take scooters and they ride bikes and they run. And there's parts there that they've had to like block off with like a gate, with like a
because it's
fence,
not safe.
because
Yeah,
when they built them, there were trees on that cliff. They cut down those trees to make that path, and those trees were protecting that cliff from erosion, and
exactly.
now it's eroding and parts of that path are collapsing. So yeah, so they want to build a wall to build this bike path in Rincon, and walls make erosion a lot worse because
Yep.
the way, and I can only speak to this very, very generally because this isn't like what I do, right? But like when water comes into the beach, there's no wall or anything. It'll move the sand around, but in the end the sand will stay where it was and the water will come right out. But when you
Exactly.
build like a wall, like a foundation to a building or anything like that, once the water comes in, it sort of bounces on that wall and it pulls the sand out with it. So over time, it starts eroding the beach. And in Rincon is very notorious for this. There's a lot of places where like they built beachfront properties, and now those houses are in water and they're
Yep.
collapsing into the water, and eventually that's going to be lost forever. But right now, that's somebody bought that. If you want to look at just in economic terms, somebody bought that house and now there's no way to sell that. That's worthless now. And
Yep.
so and the
Hmm.
people in Rincon lost a coastline, and it just keeps getting worse and worse. So this is something
Yeah.
that in Rincon especially people know that it happens. They're trying to do it again.
And they're trying to do it again. Yeah. And thank you
Yeah.
for saying that. Yeah, I think like it's kind of, I don't know, to me the information is out there, right? Everything that you just said from any expert in this could tell the mayor, could talk to the
Yeah.
developers, but they're not listening. They're all their intent on is development and building, and they're not trying to do things in a sustainable way. So, like you said, the community's aware. They've been seeing this for years, and they were just like, we're not. This is the last time that we're allowing this to happen. So, they've invited the mayor to talk to them. The mayor has said that he's going to call them. I don't know where we're at now. All I know is that the mayor has said that he'll listen, and the construction signs that were in that area have been covered up and taken down. So we're hoping that this is a win for the community, but the community, either way, they're going to stay there until they're absolutely positive that something better can be done. So I think it's just a really beautiful example of what the community can do when they come together and they fight
Yeah.
together.
Yeah.
So
I
it's
think
really
the West knows how to mobilize really well, the West of Puerto Rico. That's where Cabo Rojo is, where Proyecto Esencia is getting built,
yeah.
in Aguadilla, in Playuela, in Rincon, in a lot of different places. But even Eliezer Molina is from San Sebastian to the west. Like,
Oh
not
yeah.
saying that they're the only ones that know how to mobilize, but they seem to mobilize really quickly and to organize really quickly. And there's a lot of different groups in that area. And so I saw, because I know you've been there in the protest, and we're almost done. I know we've been
No,
talking
it's
for
okay.
forever,
You're
but like,
good.
um,
I don't
I feel
mind.
bad because we've been talking for a long time. But um, from what I could see online, it seemed like there were times where tensions got really really high with the protests, where like things got really intense. What did you see? How did it? I know protesters are like peaceful, because I've been to other protests, and it's all I always see cops trying to provoke things. But like, yeah, what did you see?
From my perspective, I didn't get a chance to go to Rincon, so I wasn't
Okay.
there physically. But
Oh,
I
okay.
did
I
talk
thought you.
to
I
the
thought you. I thought you were there. Sorry. So you went to
No,
Cabo
I had
Rojo.
I was
Yeah.
I was
Okay.
putting in my post, I put the person's name that had
Yeah.
been sharing the videos. Her name was Geishla. She's from
Mm,
Cabo Rojo. She was born and raised. And she was the one that I did the live with. And so she was the one
okay.
that I,
Okay.
I had asked her, I said, hey, can I be so I started sharing her videos and tagging her.
Okay.
Because
Okay.
that's actually one of the reasons why I feel like we can amplify more of the people's stories, because from what we were seeing, and I think they did such a great job of like sharing, because I do think that sometimes, at these protests, one of the ways that the other side benefits, like the mayor is like, oh, that we don't know, we don't even see it happening. So she was
Yeah.
great because she did a lot of lives, and so she would do the live and then she would post it. And so she covered everything. She covered the people stopping the machines and standing in front of the machines, and then she also covered the people who are surrounding the trees. And what happened, she says that naturally, she told me, people were very good about sort of like leadership. So they would naturally, people would lead and other people would follow. So I
Mm,
remember one of the videos that she was sharing, she was showing how one person was telling everybody, okay, now we're going to move over here. You can stay here, surround the trees, stay there until, this construction worker stops trying to chop the tree down. So she was showing in her videos that like the community is super organized, and they're very respectful, and I think like that's one of the things that people say, like, oh, the protesters are being crazy. And it's like, no, they're very intent on showing like, no, we're peacefully protesting, so that now, that also like shows that the mayor or anybody who tries to claim that they were disturbing the peace or doing something wrong, they have no cards against them, right? And so that was part of it. She was like, no, we're being very respectful, we're telling the police that this is illegal. At one point she even said that the police were just like, oh yeah, no, we're not helping the construction of this because we know it's illegal. They were actually like on their side. So I think that's yeah, like I think the protesting that's been happening, and the consistency, they said like every day they're there early in the morning at 6 a.m. and they stay until the afternoon. And I think, for some people who can do that, right? Because like I think that's part of it. Like some people have jobs and they can't make it there, and which has been,
It
my
takes
case.
so
I
much
can't
time
always.
and so much energy to do this kind of thing.
It's
Sometimes
a
that's the
lot of
way the
it.
government can get away with stuff, is because they can wait it out longer than people
Exactly.
can sometimes. So
See, but they're very organized. It sounds like they have like their people who are ready. And so, the surfing community, they have different organizations that are there in Rincon that are very intent on working together. So, I think they're a wonderful model for anybody who is like, oh, if this happens again. Esencia is a good example. If
yeah,
they
yeah.
start coming down and
Those
doing
groups that are
construction.
working on it are very well organized. Getting
Yes.
information out on what's going on.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's impressive the way they've mobilized over there. Yeah,
It
yeah,
really is. Yeah. And so
yeah,
I'm just lucky because I get to, share some of that information. And I went to the public hearings. I made time for that. I was able to make time for that. But yeah, I think in terms of the protesting, they're continuously doing that. So if in this week I'm able to go, I would love to go. But they're more the way that they are telling me is like the most that we can do is donate to a GoFundMe for the people that were arrested, porque some of the people were arrested, and so they're like, okay, we need to raise some funds for them. And then also just sharing everything as much as we can to let people know what's going on. And right now, as far as we can tell right now, they took down the construction signs, and so far so good. So I do
yeah.
think that at this time we can safely say that they won that battle.
Yeah.
So
For now at least.
for now,
Hopefully that's the end of it, but usually it's not. But yeah, at some
usually
point I
not.
like to have, because I know some of the people that are there protesting this. At some point I
Yeah.
like to have some of them on my podcast as
Oh
well.
yes, please.
Hopefully, sooner rather than later. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think we covered most of what I had in mind. I think
Good.
maybe we covered all of it. I can't remember, but I think
We
we covered most of what we had in mind.
we could
Uh,
talk for hours more,
yeah,
but I think that we
yeah.
covered enough to, yes, for people to know like what the environmental issues, the activism that's going on here, how it's all always tied to politics
Yeah.
as well. So I'm
So
glad that we went
if
through
people
that.
want to find you, where can they find you on social media?
So my page is Boriken Podcast on Instagram, and then on YouTube it's Boriken Pod. So
Yeah.
yeah,
So on
follow me,
Boriken
subscribe there.
Podcast, yeah, you interviewed me once. You also interviewed my
Yes, there's
girlfriend
an
Stephanie
interview
once as
with
well. She's a
Andres.
psychologist. We also did an interview with her. So
Yes.
yeah, I think that's, unless there's anything else you wanted to say before we
No,
close. I think
no,
we
I
covered
think we
everything.
covered so much, and I'm
Yeah,
just
yeah,
grateful because again, these are the spaces we need to continue to have these discussions so people are
yeah,
aware and informed on ways that they can be involved too, on ways that they
yeah,
can help, because these are organizations, they are very active and mobilized, but they can always use more voices, more people pushing to keep the awareness on them, and make sure that we can stop a lot of what's going on.
yeah, yeah.
So thank you.
Exactly, exactly. So yeah. Again, let us know in the comments if you like this kind of content. If you want to see more of it, maybe we'll do some more content in English every once in a while.
We can
And
do part two.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
That'd be good.
exactly. And other than that, thanks for listening, everybody. Bye.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
I never know how to end it.